Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me go ahead and add Angela in. Hey,
Hey,
Angela.
I was working away.
How are you?
I am good. I'm digging that whiteboard behind you. I've got one over here on the floor myself.
Yeah, I use it when I'm coaching because it's like, sometimes it's easier to explain things that way. But we're live, by the way.
Oh, hey everybody.
FYI. FYI. And everybody, as you come in, let us know if you can hear us or see us. So type 1 if you can hear us, 2 if you can see us, and 1 and 2 if you can hear and see us. Always like to make sure before we get started. And I don't see anything coming in yet. And let me
Is there anyone listening? Are we all alone?
probably at least there's people on YouTube for sure. Let me check my LinkedIn profile though,
We've
because
got
no,
Nita.
Nita says
Oh
1 and
yay,
2.
go
Okay,
Nita.
perfect. No, we have people listening. I always like to check directly on the app because one time I had this mishap and it was like I did the whole show and nobody heard it. So I just check every time.
I don't
Um,
blame you.
okay. Yep, I see some more 1 and 2s. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Doris. Becky says she's so excited for this conversation. CRAs especially, this is a series you don't want to miss. Awesome. Okay. So people are joining in. So we're not alone.
Yay!
But today we're going to be talking about blockers, everybody. A lot of people were really excited and waiting on this conversation. And thank you guys for being patient with me when I did not feel well last week, Angela, you specifically. So I really appreciate it. But I know this is a topic that everybody really, really wanted to hear.
I'm
So
really glad you're feeling better though. Glad to see you here.
you and me both. It has been a rough week last
I'm
week.
sorry.
And Regina says she can hear and see us too.
Oh good.
So before we get started, I would like to explain to everyone what blockers are so that
Mhm.
we can kind of set the tone for the conversation and make sure we're all on the same page. So explain to us what is a blocker?
It's a self-defeating habit pattern. It's the easiest way to put it. But I think probably the more something that, well, I can give you an example. So, for example, a baby. When a baby gets hungry, it needs to be changed, it cries.
Right.
As a grown woman, if you get hungry or if you need to be changed, if you cry, that's a problem, right? So it's a habit pattern, it's a behavior that you learn at some point that solves some type of problem at some point, but is now no longer serving you. And another way to put it would be you have to look outside of yourself to solve a problem. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that we have all the tools that we need to solve our own problems, but we lean on you, or we lean on the hiring manager, or we lean on our mom or our brother or our spouse or
Yeah,
our whatever to give us what we need to solve a problem. And that's a blocker. We have to learn to be able to work through our own self-defeating habit patterns and solve our problems ourselves.
absolutely. Absolutely. Great, great, great explanation. And also everybody, if you have questions that you've thought of before we even get the conversation started, please go ahead and drop them in the comments. We're going to take questions too. And I see some more people said, hey, hi, Susan. Susan is one of my clients. And hi, I want to make sure I pronounce your name right. It's Tewadros.
Tawadros.
Tawadros.
Sorry if we just butchered that.
Yes. But I think Tawadros. I think you had it, Angela. So if it's not Tawadros, please help us pronounce it. But hi, everyone. And as you join in, say hello. I see Paris says 1 and 2. As you join in, say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from. But Angela just gave us Tawadros say yes. Okay, perfect. So Angela just gave us the definition, the description for blockers. And so we're going to talk about some of the blockers on both the candidate side and then on
Mhm.
the hiring manager or manager side, if you're already employed. And then we want to hear from you guys too. Like, what blockers that we aren't, that you might already be aware of that you want to share with us, drop those in the comments. Debbie says she's joining from Chicago. Chicago. Nice.
Awesome. Yay.
Yeah. Um, so please drop any blockers that you might want to throw out there in the comments, any questions that you have in the comments as we get started on this conversation. Because it affects the whole entire industry, right?
Hmm. Well, it affects everyone everywhere. I mean, you go to the grocery store, you're dealing with the checkout lady who's got a
Well, yeah,
blocker.
that's true. That's true. In fact, yeah, you're right. Even outside of
Hmm.
the clinical research space, you're right, in life in
Hmm.
general. Olafunke, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is joining us from Georgia. And then I see Teresa is from Wilmington, North Carolina. Hey
Yay.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. So let's start on the candidate side. And Tawadro said he's in Dallas. So we have a good little range of people.
That's fantastic.
Victoria is in Birmingham. Jesse, who I told you about, he is from Chicago. He's joining us here from Chicago.
Hey, Jesse. Nice to see
Um,
you again.
yes, Jesse's great. So let's get started talking about the candidates. Aisha's from joining us from Decatur, Georgia. So let's start on the candidate side.
Hmm.
And how about we start with the fear of failure blocker? So let's talk
That
about
one's a big
that
one.
one.
Yeah, I had that one. And I think that anyone, and I had that meaning saying I've worked through it. And the whole point of this discussion today is to help raise your awareness of these self defeating habit patterns so you can figure out how to work through the blockers because that's
Right.
critically important. But my fear of failure exhibited in a lack of confidence and it caused me to be a perfectionist. I mean, there's something to be said for people that go a little bit above and beyond, but when you go way over the top, like way over the top, it's a lot of waste energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you could drive other people a little bit crazy too whenever you're going way over the
Yeah,
top.
no, I agree. I agree. And even me, that's something that I face. I faced it throughout my entire career and even now in the CTM role,
Hmm.
not feeling like I know enough or I'm good enough or any of those things. So I can relate to that one too. Like even today and to add to what you just said, that fear, it also so I'm also big on mindset stuff. And when you have like fear as your driving thought, you
Yeah,
ultimately create that reality, right?
it is.
So
It's a law of
whatever you
attraction.
right? So whatever
Yeah,
you were trying to avoid, you create it, whether you're conscious or, unconscious of it,
yeah.
just by simply constantly being scared of like whether you're gonna fail and get fired or whether you're gonna, I don't know, blow it and make a mistake and I don't know,
Mhm.
mess up the study or something, right?
I agree. Yeah, it's a really good point because you're absolutely right. I'm actually reading a book. I think I'm going to sign up for his course, but he talks about it. The book is called Supernatural, Become Supernatural, and the whole
Mm,
concept of it is, and he's a neurologist, and he talks about epigenetics and. It's very science guy, but it's also a very spiritual perspective from a perspective of where you focus is where your energy lands. And if you're focusing on having that altercation with your next door neighbor and you're worried about it, you're
yeah,
scared of it,
yeah,
you're going to have an altercation with the next door neighbor because it's where your energy is focused and you're attracting it. It's really based off of a law of attraction perspective. This isn't, I mean, this is proven in not just in the spiritual mindset, but from a scientific perspective where energy, there's like energy fields and it attracts other energy fields and all that type of thing. But you're absolutely right, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy whenever you're so worried about failure. You're either going to drive yourself into the ground to try to prove that you can do something that you're worried you can't do, or you're going to fall on your face, one of the
yeah,
two. Mhm.
yeah. Or both, like I have done some sometimes. And it's funny because I also deal with I see mostly women, but they struggle with imposter syndrome. I myself was one of them because
Mhm.
of that fear, and then also the perfectionism that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Just constantly feeling like it had to be perfect before you could do anything with it. And I used to be that way even with coaching, like feeling like it had to be perfect before I could, show it in front of my clients or present it to them. And I quickly learned um that is the opposite. Like that's how you learn and that's how you grow. And if
That's
you
exactly
wait
right.
until it's
Mhm.
perfect, you know,
Yeah,
you're
I
never going to
absolutely
make
agree.
progress.
Yeah, I just hired a new gal today for our back office team, and I told her, I said, "Fail as fast as possible." And she looked at me like I had 3 heads on my shoulders. And I was like, "No, I'm serious. I mean, embrace it, tackle it, make your mistakes, learn from your mistakes, and then get past the fact that you're going to make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. You can't be afraid of them. You should embrace them. They make you better at what you do if you look at them the right way." And if we translate this into job application, fear of failure could mean what? If you have a fear of failure as a blocker, what can that mean whenever it comes to the job search?
Everything, right? Number one, paralysis. People aren't even applying or putting themselves out there.
That's it. That's absolutely it.
And then when they are, like you said, they might be overdoing it and applying to, like, all the jobs that we talked about last time or applying to
Mhm,
the wrong jobs. Maybe they're
mhm.
applying to senior CRA roles and they haven't even been to CRA, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or they embellish or they, whenever I was getting my master's degree, I went to a job fair. My husband and I were tired of living off of oodles and noodles and bologna sandwiches. And so I thought, hey, I'll get an internship or something through the summer and finish out my master's degree. And IBM was in the job fair. And I walked all around that booth 20 times before I finally thought, what the heck? And they hired me. They hired me that day. But I almost missed out on the opportunity to have a 10-year career with them because of fear. I was afraid that they wouldn't even accept me. Hey, it's a definite no if you don't even try.
Right, right, and I always say the worst thing that they can say or do is just say no.
Exactly. Or nothing, which
Or nothing,
yes.
and you just move on, right? It's
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
Um And it's so in the moment, and for people that's listening, I know in the moment the fear can be so overwhelming and so sometimes crippling. And it just seems like, yeah, it's easier said than done, Angela and Jasmine. I get it. Like I literally face it all the time, especially now that I'm a CTM and then also with coaching.
Hmm.
I face it all the time. So I totally, totally get it. But you cannot let the fear stop you, right?
Hmm.
I was watching this show yesterday. I wrote it down in my notes. It said that fear is I know I'm gonna ruin it. I'm not even gonna try. But it was a really good statement about how fear is like, it's normal. It's like it should be expected. Oh, I think he worded it as like, if you're not afraid, especially of like change or something new, then you're a fool. But it's but it's what you do with that fear that
I agree.
matters.
Yeah, and that's what they and I can't remember who said it, but bravery isn't the lack of fear, it's you doing it anyway.
Right.
Hey, listen, if you want change in your life, you gotta step out on a ledge.
Right.
You gotta go tackle it. Be afraid, but do it anyway.
Right. Right. And that means like not just the obvious like job fairs or things like that, but
Mhm,
going to conferences and putting yourself out there and networking
mhm,
and meeting new people. Going to if you're a part of ACRP or SOCA or any other professional organization, going to local chapter meetings, putting yourself out there, those things too. And they can be very scary, especially for people that identify as introverts.
mhm.
I'm one of those people, but
Mm, yeah.
right? But you can still network, you can still do all the things we're talking about, overcome fear, even if you are an introvert or if you have other social challenges as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And then just be transparent. That doesn't mean go, "Oh my god, I'm afraid that I'm gonna fail." It just means be transparent, honest about where you are, because a really good recruiter and a really good hiring manager is gonna meet you where you are, and
Right.
they're gonna work with you to understand where your competency is today and what your goals are for tomorrow, and then help you find that position. A great coach does this, helps you map your career path to where you can identify your growth opportunities, your learning opportunities, your career progression, that whole plan. Planning takes fear away a lot, doesn't it? Having
Does.
a plan in place?
Yeah, it does. Going back to what we talked about last week, you always gotta have a plan.
Mhm.
always got to have a plan, and then trusting once you have that plan and you're putting the actions out there, trusting that it's working.
Yeah.
That's one of my affirmations that I say every day now, because I'm going through my own thing. Is that everything is working. So even if it's like, the car breaks down or something crazy happens, I just told myself everything is working.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's working the way it's supposed to,
Right.
you know?
Because so many times we think that the bad stuff is still like, it's like a mistake, or like we failed or we blew it. But if we just, try to think about, well, what if this is a part of the plan, and what if it's all working the way it's supposed to, then that can hopefully, for some people out there, ease the fear.
That's true.
Um, and then who is I don't think you said the author of the book that you're reading.
Yeah, his name is Dr. Joe Dispenza,
Joe Dispenza.
Dispenza,
Okay, I'm gonna
and
check
he's
that one out.
it's an interesting mixture of science and spirituality. Very interesting mixture. But he goes real deep into the science. But then he also focuses on how you can use meditation to get over your self-defeating habit patterns and rewire your brain and focus on your objectives and your goals and change that vibration of your brain to where you're attracting people at a higher level. And it talks a lot about to where when you're fearful, that's a very low level
Yeah,
brainwave.
yeah,
So how you can translate that into gratitude. Hey, even if you've got nothing to be happy about, you can find something to be grateful for, right? And that is a much higher level brainwave to where you're now focusing on looking for the good,
yeah,
right? And it can make a huge difference in the way you view life and where life comes to you. You don't even have to go after things anymore. You can attract it. It just actually finds you.
exactly. And I have experienced that myself.
Hmm.
So I know this to be true. And then I've heard stories from others, even my clients, even friends. So definitely you always want to do, at least that's my focus, is to try to do whatever I need to do to create that space and energy so I can always
Yeah.
be at that higher level of vibration and energy.
Consciousness. Yeah. You know
Yeah.
that our consciousness is only 5% of us? Our unconscious, our self-defeating habit patterns, the way we're wired is 95% of our personality, and it's just running on the background. That's the reason why people end up with food in their hands and they don't know where they got it. Me.
Or calling somebody and then forgetting what you were gonna say.
Exactly. It's like we become on autopilot, right? And you
Yeah.
have to break the patterns in order to solve the patterns.
Right. Right. And tying this back into this whole job search process, career success, even if you're not looking for a new job, but you're trying to get promoted, like, don't let fear stop you.
Mhm.
It's there, it's normal, it's oftentimes it should be expected if you're trying to change and grow, but don't let it stop you. Another good book by John Maxwell is Fail Forward. Do you have that one?
Yeah, I have. I've read that book. It's fantastic.
It is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if for those of you who are like really, really, really scared of failure, that's another good one because he talks about
Mhm.
how basically what we've been talking about here today, right? That it's a part of the process. And just like you told the new girl.
Yeah. Yeah. Fail is fast. That might have been where I got it, actually. I'm gonna be stealing tips and tricks from people and not giving them the proper
No,
credit.
it's sharing, it's sharing. We got it in. Okay, so and everybody, I don't see any questions yet or any comments. Well, I see comments, but not comments about what we said. So if you have any comments about the fear of failure as a blocker, or if you have any questions, or if you have anything you want to add, please do. So the next one on the list is that, and we're again, guys, we're talking about blockers for candidates on the candidate side, is
Mhm.
that I have an issue with authority blocker.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that one.
You know, that one's an interesting I had a couple of examples, I made a couple of notes, but so I had a gal this was years ago. So there's no if she is listening, heaven forbid, she will not think it was her because this was like way back. I still lived in Atlanta at the time, way back. But she's very senior level. I was super excited to talk to her, and I was interviewing her. That's what recruiters do. We're asking, how many years of this, and can you tell me about the endpoints of this study, and what kind of experience do you have with that, and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
She just got really, really quiet. And I think I'm a delight. I mean, I think I'm a lovely person, right? So
You are. You are.
but she just got really, really quiet, and then all of a sudden, she just flipped her lid, and it was, "I take umbrage," and I'll never forget the wording because I never have used that word before. I almost had to look it up to figure out what it meant. "I take umbrage to being asked all of these questions. I've been in this industry for over 25 years, and I'm a diamond, and you are very lucky to be talking to me, and I should not have to explain myself to you or anybody else." I was thinking to myself, well, okay then. I was like, I didn't even know what to say. I was like, I mean, I was so floored because to me, and I've had some comments on the post, some of the posts that I did last week about gaps. And I think you had mentioned in one of your blockers, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, but hiring managers' biases and how that can definitely
Mhm.
negatively impact. And maybe had that bias that I have a bias, because that could be another blocker, is that
Mhm.
you expect the worst out of your recruiters. I don't know.
Mhm.
But, whenever you're trying to build a relationship for the very first time, think of it like a first date, right? You meet for coffee or you meet for a glass of wine and you talk and you get to know each other. Well, what do you do and how is this and what's your experience? That's what your interview with a recruiter is supposed to be like. And yes,
Right.
if it's the first call, you have to explain how much oncology experience you have. I'm sorry, but it's the way that it works. But it was clearly an issue with authority. And I just thought it was a really interesting blocker because, of course, that got her blacklisted from our firm because, hey, if she's not going to let us interview her, I'm not going to trust to put her in front of one of our
Right.
clients, right?
Right. Victoria says, "Wow." Yes, Victoria. Wow. Like, seriously. Um, so anybody that's listening, that's a thing to not say when the
Yeah,
recruiter is interviewing you. Um, and even I don't know, would you say that she has that in that specific example, maybe she has a few other blockers too? Is
maybe
that
self-defeatist. I mean, maybe she had a confidence issue.
right?
Maybe she's scared of interviewing. I mean, something caused her to just, you know, and I don't know. Maybe it was her 12th interview of the week and she was worried about making her mortgage payment. I mean, there could be so much, but and I another situation this past week, and I was the second interview. My recruiter had taken the first interview with the gal, and she kind of passed her references. She hadn't failed them, but she passed them enough. So I did the second call because she was borderline, cute as a stinking button, and she had nice job tenure. So when you look at her resume, it looked pretty buttoned up. But from the moment we got on the phone, all she did was complain about her management.
Oh God.
In an interview with the head of the recruiting operations team, the whole 45 minutes was being called out because she was late on her reports or her project managers don't support her or
Oh
her this or her
God.
that or her whatever. And I felt really bad because there's no way I can put her in front of our clients. No way. Because I don't even know if I can coach her to behave better in an interview. Clearly she's good at what she does. Maybe it's a sign of maturity. Maybe she's worried about her mortgage payment. I'm not really sure. But you have to take a look at your recruiters and your hiring managers, whether it's a third party recruiter like me or it's a corporate recruiter from a PPD or a Park or whatever. You have to treat them like they're your hiring managers. You've
Yeah.
got to be on your best behavior. And if you're not going to treat whoever's interviewing you with the respective authority, then that's going to transfer, I think, or at least we think it will
Yeah.
into the actual workplace.
And one of the things that I find through coaching, and then not even just through coaching, like as an employee, um, a lot of people just don't know that that is not something you should say. So for those people, explain to them why that is a bad thing if you want the job.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, and I will tell you this: I have worked with some CRAs we've had placed for years, and I want them to come and vet to me if they've got an issue at work in the contract where we have them placed. I want them to call me and vent and unleash and tell me how terrible that person is, and let's come up with a solution. Let's get it off your chest, then let's get problem conscious and let's go solve the problem, right? But when you just met me and I'm assessing you, whenever if somebody is interviewing you, yes, they care about your competency. Absolutely. I want to know how good you are at your job. But I'm also concerned about your professionalism because I got to see the whole package. It's
Right.
communication skills, it's professionalism, it's your ability to connect, it's the way that you articulate the details that you're looking
Right.
to articulate. It's were you on the interview on time? That's why we actually do scheduled calls. I don't just call you out of the blue. We have a scheduled call because I want to
Right.
know that you can make it on time. So there's a whole big package out there that's more than just talking to me about how many years of oncology experience you've got. And that's where all of you guys that are listening have to really think about it. When you're talking, build a connection with me. Please make me fall in love with you and share where it makes sense to share. But you've got to know what's right and wrong to share. Are you going to go to the site and complain about your sponsor? You got to know your boundaries and
Right.
your audience and who you're talking to and who you're talking to about it and your relationship with them. And that's where I think this gal fell because from a maturity perspective, she didn't really understand that that's not a good first impression. I mean, let's have a discussion about because I opened up the call. Tell me what you're looking for. How can I help you?
Right. Right. And then she just vomited all that
Yeah. I want to
into
be in a supportive environment and I want to be, and I do too. Well, tell me a little bit more about that. Well, I am so tired of being called out because shoo, right downhill, you know?
mm,
So, I mean, I get it. People look to leave companies for a lot of different reasons, but there's a way to be PC about it, politically correct enough to where
right.
you can share the honest, be transparent, real reason about why you're leaving, but let's not get down to the negative brainwaves. Let's have the discussion about I just don't feel that I'm getting the support that I need and I really want to work in a collaborative environment.
Thank you.
Boom, there you go.
Versus my manager sucks and I hate the sponsor and I'm sick and tired of all these sites. There's no work-life balance and they don't care about me.
Exactly. Yeah, all true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example of how you can, say the same thing essentially, but keeping it professional, politically correct.
And you want to keep it positive too. I mean, even whenever you're going through behavioral interviewing, you're going to be asked questions like, tell me about a time where you made a mistake, or tell me about a time whenever blah, blah, blah happened. Hey, listen, the example is not going to be a positive example because you're explaining where you made a mistake, but you've got to turn it around and look for problem solving solution. So this
Exactly.
is what I did. This is how I fixed it. This is how I learned to never do it again. This is what,
Right.
you show a sign of a growing, mature individual rather than just complaining, right? There's a
Right.
whole difference between complaining and explaining what happened and then talking about how you solved it. It's two different
Right.
worlds.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out too, because I find that during the interview, that's another challenge that people have with those types of questions,
Mhm.
or the question where they ask about your weaknesses, things like that. Anything that's like a mistake, negative experience. People have issues or challenges discussing them without just leaving it on that bad note and making themselves look like, this awful candidate.
Yeah. Or on the flip side, they do a very high level, superficial response.
That's true. That's
A-
true.
and I don't want fluff, right? I mean, I'm not a fluff gal. That's just not the way I'm wired.
No, not at
You
all.
know, so, tell me about a weakness. I want you to say, "Hey, I have a fear of failure, and it makes me be a perfectionist, and I understand that. But I promise you it won't affect me because I'm learning to overcome it, and here's my solution." Be transparent. Talk about the impact, but talk about what you're doing to solve it.
Right, right. Don't just leave it on, I'm a perfectionist, and
I'm
then
gonna make your life crazy.
right. Don't just leave it there. You can there's always a way to say the same thing, but use different words,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's key when you're going through this whole process, regardless of who you're talking to. I always say that the interview starts the moment you decide, right, to put yourself out there.
Mhm.
Be mindful of that. So not just during the conversation, but even in your emails, even if you're DMing on LinkedIn or whatever, be mindful of, how you're presenting yourself.
I agree. Every interaction,
Every
every
interaction.
single
Every
one.
interaction.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one that we have on the list is the I'm not good enough blocker.
Yeah. It's a little bit different than the fear of failure.
And I experienced that one too.
Yeah. I think most of us have, haven't we? And it can start way back. I mine was, I have a twin brother who's like 6'4", ex-military, and then I had an older brother who was 8 years older than me, and they would make me play football with them out in the fields. Of course, I wasn't good enough. But does an 8-year-old girl understand that? I mean, it really kind of like screws with your head, doesn't it? And then you start thinking, well, am I good enough to play volleyball in college? Or am I good enough well, I'm not even going to try out for cheerleading because I'm not good enough. I'm not this, I'm
Yeah.
not that. And it can present in a very similar way as a fear of failure. But there's a difference because the I'm not good enough people just accept where they are and just complain and moan about it rather than try to
Yeah.
make a difference.
Yeah, and then it's like the I am not good enough. I guess for me, it's like a different type of feeling than the fear of failure too, because it's like it starts to how can I put it? It starts to affect like how you feel about your worth and your value.
Hmm.
Also, not even just like career wise, but your worth and value as a person.
That's true.
So then you all of a sudden, just because I don't know, you were late on a report or you forgot to send that email or whatever. Now all of a sudden I'm not good enough, you know, I'm not worthy enough. I'm a bad person. It can potentially turn into all those things, right?
You're absolutely right. It's a big self-defeatist scenario. It really is. And again, from a job application perspective, you might embellish because you think your
Yeah.
skills aren't good enough, so you make out that you're something different,
Mm, that's a
which
good
is
one.
not good. I mean, do you really want to get into a job where you said you've had 12 years of oncology and you've been in this cell and gene therapy and CAR T and all of that, and you get there and you spell CAR T wrong?
You do not. And that's a great point because I see that in a lot of aspiring CRAs, and that they feel like, and this ties in a little bit with the fake CRAs, right? They feel like they can't get in by being just themselves
Yeah,
and just showing their actual experience. They feel like, well, who would hire me if they saw this?
I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's really part of, I feel like, anyways, maybe a little bit of fear, but I'm not good enough has to be fueling the fraudulent CRA market, right?
Maybe. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that feed that. I think some of it's just pure greed.
Well, I like to think that that's not it. People are just scared and afraid and they don't know what to do.
They go through a lot of effort. If they work that hard to just go get the experience,
That is true. I always say that, about like scammers and stuff, and they have these elaborate schemes, and it's like, if you can
oh
do
my
all
god.
this, you can do anything.
I know, right? It's so smart. I mean, you could tell they're smart. The way they craft it and cobble it all
Right.
together, and they go out and create websites and pretend they're pharmaceutical companies. They got people answering the phone and taking references. I mean, it's it's like this whole web that they've got going on there, and I'm like, man, you're so smart. Just go do the work.
Right. That's it. Like, just put it in a different direction. This energy in a different direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the not enough. And I don't know if you see this on your end, but I feel like this is a challenge that women face more than men. Maybe the men aren't discussing it and maybe they don't share their feelings as much as we do, right? But just based off of and again, maybe they're faking it. Maybe the examples that I have, they've all just been faking it. But for some reason, we as women, we can't get to that point of faking it.
Maybe.
It seems like we struggle a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think men behave to those types of stressors a little bit differently too, though, don't they? If they don't feel like they're good enough, they're just going to go punch somebody in the face and make them feel strong. I don't mean to be stereotypical, but men do. I'm sorry, all you guys out there, I'm not
No,
trying
no,
to.
I get what you mean.
But there is men do handle these types of blockers differently, don't they?
Yeah, yeah,
Feeling that you're not good enough, a man's going to present that in a completely different way than a female might.
yeah. Yeah, I agree, and then also just the conditioning of
Mhm.
how men are raised versus women in most households. Of course, some households are different, but
Yeah.
not even at home. Like, if when you go to school, when you're at work, when you're in the
Mhm.
grocery store, like, how women have been trained to behave or to navigate the world or to just be is totally
Mhm.
different than men. So, I'm pretty sure that probably has something to do with it too.
Could be. And it could even go back to something as simple as body image.
That's
You know?
another thing.
You
Yeah.
know? It's like, whew, I mean, how am I gonna look whenever I go onto that site? I'm all chubby or I'm this or I'm that or I'm whatever, you
That's
know? I mean,
me. That was me for sure, and then my weight lately has been fluctuating a lot, so before I started coaching, I would never get on here with, like, my hair done and, like, if I felt like I was overweight, put on some makeup, like, the whole 9, right? But then I realized that that was just coming from a place of ego and pride, because at the end of the day, if I say I really wanna help people, nobody's coming on here to see what I have on for the day or to see what my hair looks like, or you know what I mean? Like,
and
people
now, all of a sudden, you're good enough.
right? Right, but I had to overcome that thought, and I had to overcome that
Mhm.
fear. I had to
Mhm.
overcome all of it,
Mhm.
um, and just focus on the goal at, like, what is the purpose? The purpose is not
Mhm.
like, now, of course, if I'm selling makeup or if I'm like if I'm supposed to be a fashionista or something like that, then of course
Right.
that's different.
Yeah.
But no, not for clinical research.
I agree. If you're trying to help somebody else, I mean, it really is about the goal, isn't it? We've talked about goals before, and how important it is to set it. And whenever you're focused on a goal, and again, you're inwards looking out, what can I do to help? What can I do to make a difference in
Right,
this industry? What are my strengths and skills, my God given talent
right,
that I can give to this company? Honest to goodness, go perform. Now you're not worried about whether or not you're good enough. You know what skills and talents you have.
right.
You know where you can contribute and the people that you can help. And whenever you're really honest and sincere about it, it just kind of all falls together, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And then you see that all the things that you thought weren't good enough or all the fears that you had, like, they become so small.
Hmm.
It's like before it was a mountain, like, how am I ever gonna do this? And now it's just like a little speed bump. Like, why was this ever an issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Once you've reprogrammed it and you've worked through it and you realize, it's just another way to be a stumbling block to keep you from being successful.
Basically, pretty much.
Yeah.
And sometimes for me, I don't know about anybody else, but that's like part of my Victoria said it becomes a passion.
Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It
And
does.
then, Regina says, "I agree." But for me, it also, I feel like dang it, I just lost the thought. What was the last thing you said? You forgot to?
I did. I got distracted by the passion comment because
Me
it's such a
too.
point, isn't it?
It is.
And that is the point. Don't you wanna go to bed being all excited about who you're gonna see and help the next day rather than worrying about, "Can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it?"
Right. Right, it creates such a different mood for
Mhm.
your household in general, right? Who wants to be around the person that's constantly, like, second guessing, questioning themselves?
I agree. Yeah, yeah. And you actually had a really, really good blocker that I love, and it's that whole "everybody's out to get me" discrimination blocker, and I don't know if it feeds off this "I'm not good enough" blocker or not, but there's a part of me that wonders if sometimes it does. You wanna blame somebody else for not
Yeah,
getting that job,
yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree, and I think probably the fear one too, right? That could be a number of things that's fueling the, discrimination blocker.
Maybe.
Which we might as well go and segue into that one, the discrimination blocker. And I told you this might be a touchy subject for some people. And it's not, we all know that discrimination exists, right?
Mm.
And Regina says, I agree. For a variety of reasons, whether it's race, whether it's age, whether it's sex, religion, you name it, we can, there's a some type of discrimination out there, right? So
Absolutely
we
agree.
know they exist. We're not invalidating that. That's a fact.
Mhm.
However, in spite of those things that are out there, don't let them then become a blocker or an excuse for you to just stay where you are.
Yeah, yeah, and not approach someone that you might perceive as being discriminatory as well. Um, you look like you lost something.
No, my computer is about to die and I don't see my charger and I hate to get up, but I don't want us to shut.
You
How
go get your charger, I'll tell them a story while you're going
thank
and getting
you,
your charger.
thank you, thank you.
For those of you guys that don't know me, I spent 10 years working with IBM before I started this company or co-started this company. Well, IBM is a very male-dominated world, and of course, I'm a blonde-haired Southern chick with not as much of a deep Southern accent as I had because I've worked on it, but I was very much discriminated against, not because of the company. The company was fantastic, but working within the teams and all of that. And then, of course, the larger of a scale of the global teams that I started managing, the worse the discrimination got. I mean, people wouldn't take me seriously. I would go in and help set up a raised floor in Italy, and I mean, it took a lot of convincing for people to start taking me seriously. And you talking about establishing some blockers, wow, that can really make some blockers sink in. And that may be part of the reason why I had the fear of failure blocker, because I was working 100-hour weeks just to prove that I could do the job. And that's where you start thinking, I can't just do my job. I've got to do more than my peers do, and I've got to do it better than they do. So, if discrimination is a real thing, I published an article last week about ageism. It's a big deal. Ageism, discrimination, for those of you that are trying to break into the industry, it's a big deal. There are certain ethnic groups in this industry that are very heavily discriminated against. It is a real thing,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to say it's easy to get over. I'm certainly not going to say that. I mean, I know, Jasmine, you probably had your share of discrimination as well, but it is a real thing. And the reality is we have to put on our big girl, big boy panties and go deal with it, because you can't just pretend it doesn't exist. You
Right.
have to figure out how to work through it.
Right. And the good news is you can work through it.
Yeah.
Cuz some
Mhm.
people feel like, "Oh, I can't I can't control my age or I can't control my race or I can't control my accent." And it's funny you bring that one up cuz I that's something that I face too,
Yeah.
especially since I started out on the bench side and all those little fancy scientists. And they immediately think that when you have that southern accent that you're stupid.
Yeah.
And so I used to try to hide it and change it or whatever, but then it
I did
was
too.
like,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah. I don't even think I realized that I had tuned or toned mine down so much until I took my husband home to meet my mom, and he couldn't understand a word she said. Now, granted, he's from the UK, so she couldn't understand him either. But it was hysterical because we were living together, and obviously he understood me. So I think, again, that's another unconscious thing that happens is you try to like smooth the rough edges. And I see a question. Is it mignone?
Yeah,
Is
mignon. But
How do
is
you get out of the box that you've gotten stuck in? I mean, if you're talking about discrimination, it's a great question, because if you're in a team right now that's discriminating you, there's only a couple of options that I can think of, Jasmine, is A, you kick their butts because you kick your own butt and you work yourself to death and prove it. Or B, you go somewhere where you're going to be
yeah,
accepted
yeah.
better.
Unfortunately, sometimes that is the solution, right? You gotta get out. And then mignon, let us know if it's mignon. If not, please correct us.
Yes.
But she said she get offers for the same roles and she can't get out of PM. So what role are you trying to get into? And I'm assuming
Me.
when you say you get offers for the same roles, you mean you continue to get other PM roles. She says Mimi. We can call her Mimi. Do you mean we can call you Mimi? Um, but let us know, what do you mean when you say you get offers for the same roles?
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
because that may have might be discriminatory, but it might have less to do with that and more to do with the presentation of the resume
Right.
and the statement of what your career goals are and whether or not your resume tells a story. I know people get tired of me saying that, but I like to read a resume like I read a novel. And it's important for me to be able to look at a resume and see where you've been and see where you're going.
I
And
agree.
I mean, it's critically important to do, and there's an art to it. Makes a difference though.
I agree. And she says, yes. It sounds like she keeps getting offered the same PM roles.
Mhm. Yeah.
So then that one may or may not be discrimination then, like you said.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But going back to I don't even remember where I left off before the charger just completely threw me off.
Well, we were talking about discrimination and that it was real and that it's a touchy subject, obviously, and the fact that it is real, we're not gonna be able to sidestep it.
Right, that's a whole thing and a problem of itself that requires its own separate solution. But
Mhm.
don't feel like you have to put your career or your life on pause until we solve that problem that's been going on since humans have been on
Well,
planet Earth.
but that's my question for you, is it going to be solved? I mean, the Tower of Babel is a real thing. That was by divine intervention. Don't you believe that there's a part of this? And I'm not saying that makes it okay, but I think it makes us have to work through issues that we have from a human perspective with each other because we're different. We're different because we were made different, which means we're going to have to solve these problems. They're not going to go away. We can't put our head in the sand. Let's figure out how to play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, I guess I just like to stay hopeful. And I would like to think that one day we can all just get along, like the famous words of Rodney King. Can we all just get
Can we just
along?
all get along? And we've come a long way, you
We
know?
have, but I would like to think we can continue to go further. And then it's weird, like we're in the US, right? But
Mhm.
I know I have a lot of followers that are outside of the US. And in some countries, it's like on another level, or not on another level, like specifically maybe for race, but maybe like sex, like how they treat women is completely like, I
I
don't want
wasn't
to
even
go.
allowed to go to some countries as a female without an escort whenever I worked with IBM, and I
Mm.
had people working for me in those countries. I had to have a male go with me, stay with me the 100% of the time that I was there.
And that is just so crazy that
Mhm.
this day and age, some women are still like being subjected to that, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. But even then, you find women in these countries, they still find a way to overcome, right?
They do. Yeah, they absolutely do, and that is maybe that's part of our challenge, isn't it? Is we're put on this earth to figure out how to solve some of these problems, instead of ignoring them, instead of blaming others for them. All of us take our accountability for our part and then try to start working through, like you said, the hope. Can't we all just
Right.
get along?
Right, because at the end of the day, unless you, like, grew up under a rock in a hole where you didn't encounter anybody, we all have some level of unconscious bias, which is like
Mhm.
this thing now. I've even had some training, at work previously where we talk about unconscious bias and how it impacts how you do your job, and, all that stuff is becoming a thing now, just like the DEI. But it really does impact, like, everything you do.
Yeah,
And if you aren't aware of it, then you can make choices and decisions that could ultimately hurt you, hurt the company, hurt the other person,
I
and you're
agree.
not even trying to do it.
I agree. We do training programs for hiring teams that need help to learn how to do unbiased interviewing because interviewing is so biased and it's unconscious. I mean, I'm never going to go on record to say someone's purposely, consciously practicing stereotyping or discrimination or whatever, but the unconscious bias is there, and it can be anything from interviewing a blonde hair chick or a Jasmine from Atlanta or
Yeah,
what. I mean, it can be anything that could cause the bias, good, bad, or ugly. We, as job seekers or individuals who are going to represent job seekers, we have a responsibility, and you as a CTM is to a train your peers to become conscious of their own biases so that they can at least be aware of them. They're going to be less likely to act on them if they are. But B, educate the job seekers.
Right.
This is the baggage they're going to bring to the table.
Right. Right. No, you're so right. And it's I'm glad people are talking about it now, right? It's a thing, and now it's like, cuz the first step to any type of change is awareness. Cuz if you're
Hmm.
not even aware that's a problem, like how are you going to fix it? But I also don't want it to just be another one of those like trainings or things that you
Yeah.
know, you just check off to say, "Oh, well, we told them about unconscious bias, so we did our job." You know what I mean? Like we did our job and then that's it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because it does impact how we move and navigate the world as a whole.
I agree. Yeah. And I don't know how to fix that one. If other people aren't going to take responsibility for evaluating their own unconscious behavior, that's really what this whole topic is about, is our unconscious behaviors and how they drive us, whether it be a blocker or bias or whatever you want to call it. But everyone has to take responsibility for those actions, don't they?
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Ultimately. And again, we know we're not going to save like racism and sexism and ageism overnight, right? We understand that that's
Mhm.
this problem that requires a solution. I'm not saying get over it. I'm just simply saying don't let that stop you from creating the life and the career that you want.
That's exactly right. Just be aware it's out there so that you can navigate it a little more gracefully rather than being side blinded, you
Right,
know?
right.
Mm.
Victoria says no putting action behind the training or the words. Right,
Mhm.
right. And Regina says, wow, that's so cool. Thanks, Daryl. Daryl says we have great content.
Oh,
That's
good.
um so yeah, no, and people please feel add some questions that you additional questions that you might have. Mignon, thank you for your question. But any other additional questions or comments you want to have,
Mhm.
please feel free to add them. And then another one of the candidate blockers is the I'm entitled blocker. Let's talk
Mhm.
about that one.
Yeah, these are these folks that think they're bulletproof. And you know what? A lot of times they are pretty competent people. I mean, I got to give them credit. They pass the interview, they pass the competency assessment. Their references for the most part say things that are decent. But these are the individuals that never make a mistake, and they scare the bejesus out of me, right?
Mm,
Because that means they're not going to hold themselves accountable. You cannot correct them. You cannot educate them on what they're doing wrong because they're always right. They're entitled. Who are you talking to? It's a little different than the gal that took umbrage to my interview questions, right? But again,
authority.
it can present a very similar way. And I call this the mediocre group. Because to me
Mm,
are these individuals, I've talked about my bell-shaped curve before. You've got the fraudulent, you've got the underperforming, you've got the mediocre, and then you've got the top 2%, right? Well, the mediocre could make it to the top 2% if they just were accountable and if they would self-assess and they would humble themselves rather than acting like they're entitled. They don't deserve anything. None of us do. We all have to work for it, so work for it, you know?
yeah, and when we say deserve, because I know, there's people out there that are just waiting to attack you. We don't mean your value as a person.
Right,
We're
right,
not
right.
talking about that. We're specifically talking about the
You got to
skill set
compete like
that you
everybody else
right,
does.
that
Yeah.
you're bringing to the workplace, and you don't deserve to become a CRA, CTM, PM, whatever, just because you put your name out there.
You
Like,
woke
and
up today and decided you wanted to be one.
right, and there's a line of people who have all the skills, who have all the not just the hard skills, but the soft skills. They're
Mhm.
professional, but you don't want to do anything other than just show up and say, "Hey, I should get the job." That's what we're talking about, everybody.
Right, right, right. Thank you for keeping them from killing me on that one.
Everybody's quick to cancel culture is real these days.
Yeah, but it's a humble approach, isn't it? And again, this goes very much back to just be very transparent, be real, be honest
Mhm.
to yourself and to others about the weaknesses and your career growth plans and trajectory. Those individuals that, honest to goodness, they think that they're just the bee's knees and they don't make any mistakes, and they really are awful because you can put them somewhere and they do an okay job, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and for the people that are like, well, if they're doing an okay job, they're meeting the bare minimum expectations, right? What's wrong with that, Angela?
Well, I guess for those people that are fine with mediocre, that's fine, but I'm just not wired that way, right? I mean, I want to be the best that I can be. Don't you want to be your supernatural self, your best human ever, and go and not just be the best at what you're doing today, but, you know, what is it? Matthew McConaughey, he had an acceptance speech. I think it was him. He had this acceptance speech, and they asked him, and he was accepting like a Grammy or something like that. You guys have to Google it. You'll find it. But he talks about his hero, and his hero is
I
him
saw
5 years
that
from
one.
now,
I
right?
saw that one. That was
Isn't
good.
that great? And he talks about him being his hero. He's setting his sights on who he wants to be 5 years from now or whatever the time frame is, and that's who he's working on is him today to be that better person, right?
Yeah, that was
He
so good.
Yeah, he's not just drifting along, he's going after something. He might not know what that something is yet, but he knows it's better than where he is right now.
Right.
And if you really wanna be on a career now, if you're okay just drifting around in the ocean, then drift around in the ocean.
Right.
But if
But
you
you
wanna
probably aren't if you're listening, right?
Yeah, exactly. But if you want a you want a trajectory, you want a path, you want to grow, you can't be mediocre. You gotta self-assess.
You
You gotta
got
take
to.
accountability too.
You got to. And the thing that I love about what he said was that it all boils down to you.
Mhm.
So you can't blame your manager, you can't blame the recruiter, you can't blame your friend who was supposed to refer you, but she never did. It's
Or maybe she did and she wasn't well thought of and, that could be a problem.
who knows, right? The point is that it all boils down to us,
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah,
And the great news about that is that that gives you some control. So for people
that's
that
true.
feel like I don't have any control, like I've done everything, there's nothing else I can do, they just don't like me. That's not based in truth. That's not accurate.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Because you are good enough.
You are. You
Mhm.
are. And to just go back to what you said about the mediocre, most of those people, you only have to do just a little. We're not even talking about like jumping through hoops and loops and stuff, right? For most of these people, it's just a little bit more effort,
Yeah.
just a little bit, and it can make a huge difference, go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. You're right. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of extra hours, if any extra hours. It's a mindset. It's an approach. It's a
That's
view
true.
of, wow, thank you for correcting me. I had no idea. I really appreciate it. Saying thank you or saying I'm sorry. And accepting it. Truly accepting the fact
Truly
that you've been
accepting it.
corrected. You
Right.
know. Mm,
Right. I always advise for people to ask for feedback, whether it's a recruiter conversation, the actual interview, whether you're just chit-chatting over coffee. Even in my personal life, a lot of people say I ask too many questions, but whatever. I just like I don't like to assume and I don't like to guess or wonder.
mhm,
And then also, I also am constantly trying to self-correct. Not to say that
mhm.
anybody should become me because it is exhausting sometimes, but that's how you get better. And if
It is.
if you again going back to awareness, if you're unaware that you aren't even doing a better job or you could do a better job, how are you supposed to do better, right? So I always advise for everybody to ask for feedback in everything you do. Everything
And
you
listen to it.
do. And listen to it. Don't
Yeah.
just say, "Oh God, they don't know their
Because I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of times it's because people don't know. I had to let someone go from one of my favorite sponsors several years ago, and we had about 30 CRAs over there. And this sponsor was one of the sweet. She is the sweetest lady I have ever known in my entire lifetime. She
Mm,
hated she hated having to call me and asking me to release somebody for any reason. So you knew that she bent over backwards for this gal before we had to
mm,
release her. But she just wasn't getting it. She couldn't navigate the systems. I mean, for all the years experience that she had, she just wasn't connecting the dots. I mean, she was flunking left, front, and center, and she was behind on like 7 reports. I mean, it
mm,
had escalated to the point to where it was, and so unfortunately I had to release her. And I was very transparent. And I always, have the discussion and I try to make sure that I'm I'm doing it in a very respectful way. And, how's
Mhm.
it going? Well, what did you think? And, and so we had
Mhm.
a pretty open dialogue about what was happening. And then I always follow up with an email. And I actually craft the emails before I have the discussion because it helps me to stay on track. So I, don't feel all the emotional charge from the person and get distracted and forget to tell them what was really going on and all that. So I already had the email. And then so I sent her the email afterwards. And so that way, if she was upset, which she probably was when we talked, she would have the email to refer to. And she was a sweet girl, don't get me wrong. Well, 7 months later, I get this email from her out of the blue. And she said, I'm trying to find a job. And I know that you laid me off because of lack of work for this, whatever company it is. Therefore, I believe that you should write me a letter of recommendation. That's an entitled individual.
And she didn't get the feedback, did she?
I really do believe that often folks that feel entitled are getting the feedback. It's just, and that's a blocker. It's a self defeating habit pattern. You might not even consciously realizing that you're blocking it. You've got to consciously rewire it so that you're, like you said,
That's
solicit
true.
that feedback and then listen for
That's
it.
true.
Right?
That's true. But I am still shocked. I didn't think that's where this story was going. I thought you were gonna say that she found a new job and she had worked on everything you told her and she's doing great.
Oh no. Oh no.
I
Oh
didn't
no.
expect that turn. Oh God. Well, let me ask you this. So in those situations where you do have to let somebody go because of poor performance and the sponsor has requested it, do they then become blacklisted or can you still potentially work with them on another client?
That's such a great question. It depends on why they were released. We worry a lot about cultural fit. So if because I mean someone that can work at a PPD might not be able to work at a small 20-person sponsor. It's a completely different environment, completely different management style, culture. The expectations of the role are completely different. Very
Mhm.
siloed versus you need to be able to do everything you can all hands on deck. It's so
Mhm.
different. So if someone gets released because it's a personality mismatch, or maybe they're really good at doing reg and monitoring and the basic CRA and site management stuff, but this company needs more of other stuff because they're small all hands, then yes, we absolutely work with them again. If it's a situation to where it's just straight out competency, like monitoring 101 stuff, um, or if they've fallen really far behind on their deliverables and they didn't raise their hand ahead of time and say, hey, look, my mom just had a heart attack. I've got to spend time in the hospital, or I'm sick, or my kid got whatever. If you're communicating and you're late, that's one thing. But just to be late and not say anything to anybody, that's different. That's a personal accountability issue that shows a lack of professionalism. And in those instances, a lot of times we're not going to place you again.
So in that specific example you gave with her being late on reports, that's a very important deliverable as a monitor. Falling behind on 7. What was her situation?
Oh yeah, no, she was blacklisted. I mean, we wouldn't place her again. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, we won't.
Um,
I mean, it doesn't mean, I mean, and sometimes I have these folks come to me and ask me to be a reference. And and for any of you guys out there listening, if anybody ever asks you to be a reference, be honest with them. I'm always honest and say, I will be a reference for you, but you will not be happy with what I say because I will be completely honest. But a lot of times we'll have individuals that will say, yeah, I'll be a reference. And so then we'll call them and they'll go, well, I don't know why she asked me to be a reference because I fired her. So, so don't be passive aggressive. Be honest. If you're not going to give them a good reference, be honest.
right, because
you know
nobody wants you to give a bad reference by
it happens all the
definition.
time. You'd
That's
be so surprised
crazy.
how often that it happens.
I didn't think that it would happen that often because in my mind it's like, well, duh. Where I'm at. Nobody is asking for a bad reference. So if you can't give a good one, don't just like I always say this line from Bambi when Thumper's mom was telling him that he always talked too much and he said all this, negative stuff. She said, Thumper, what do I say? And he's like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say nothing at all.
Right.
I just feel like that's just common sense, right?
I think so. I mean, why are you going to like run a train over somebody just a little
Right?
bit?
That's just so rude.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, now we know. Please check and ask your references. Can you give me a good reference and then proceed to say, okay, well, will you give me a reference? That's
Exactly.
crazy.
Yeah.
Um, so Mignon says that she gets PM offers, but she wants to move into patient engagement, clinical or site engagement roles, and she wants to have more patient focusing responsibilities.
I can't believe that they're not gobbling you up.
Yeah, so it does sound like it's probably a branding and marketing problem then, right?
Like,
If she's getting PM offers but not what she wants.
and it may be that these organizations are really worried that you're stepping back,
That's true too. And they
because
feel
that's
like
another bias, right? Why would
the
I hire someone at this level to come and do this? I mean, they might see that you've already elevated beyond that, and they don't see it's your passion to do, and that may be the way that you're presenting, but you might be working with individuals that have that bias as well.
yeah, that's a big one. And then people I guess it kind of ties into them feeling like you're overqualified, like you said.
Mhm.
So why would she want to quote unquote step down? So yeah, Mignon, it sounds like that's what's going on in your case.
Mhm.
And then going back to what you mentioned about culture fits, I hear
Mhm.
that a lot. And people tell me they're confused when they hear that. What does culture fit mean?
Well, we do a lot of assessment on personality as far as, I mean, we don't do personality tests, don't get me wrong, but whenever we're talking to your references and we know the companies you work for. I mean, we've been in this industry forever. So we understand that a worldwide clinical trials culture is this, and a Park Cell culture is that,
Mhm.
and a Pfizer culture is whatever. I mean, we know it because we know these companies. And so whenever we're looking for personality, what we're looking for is what type of management style you've already excelled in, and what type of culture you've already excelled in. And then
Mm.
based off of your trajectory, we make an assessment on where you might fit best for success. Because hey, you can go in and do 100% SDV all day every day, or you might know risk-based monitoring like the back of your hand, and you can go through a binder like nobody's business.
Mhm.
But if you can't navigate the dynamics of the management culture and the way the team operates cohesively or not, it's not gonna work, not
Yeah.
long term,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And thanks for explaining that. Because I also, at least the feedback that I get is that when people hear culture fit, they go back to discrimination and then they
Mhm.
feel like, oh, it's because I'm not the right color, or it's because I'm not the right race, or I'm not the right age. So they think culture fit is just kind of like code for some type of discrimination.
I gotcha. Well, I mean, I'd like to think that my sponsors don't practice that type of discrimination, but you never really know unconsciously what's going on. But what I'm worried about culture fit is putting you into an environment where you're gonna be set up for success. Our goal is
Love
to make
that.
sure you stick where we put you. And if I put you, for example, if you're one of those really sweet, chatty gals that just you like to build relationships and you want to talk to your manager about her grandbabies and that type of thing, I'm not putting you at Parkdale. That is never going to happen, right? Because they will eat you for breakfast, and they're going to tell you that you're billing too much time because you're chatting too much at the sites, and you're not. That's a culture fit, right?
That's a good example. No, you're right. And a lot of people don't get that, especially if you're like completely coming from a completely different industry.
Yeah.
I say that to all of my bench science people. For them, that's a huge challenge because in the lab it's like slower and we're not dealing with humans, so there's not as many strict rules and regulations
Hmm.
and people have that is one of the challenges that people face making that transition,
Hmm.
is that the pace is like night and day.
Yeah, I can see that as culture too. Because you're right. I mean, these large CROs are so metrics driven, and the small to medium sized sponsors, they are like metrics who? They it's different. It's a completely different environment.
It is, no, it's night and day. And Jakia says, I like Angela, too straight to the point. Me and Jakia, we are actually, I love her. We actually are coworkers, and she's really great for anybody that is looking for, an associate CTM. She's looking to
Oh, yeah.
transition over. So Jakia, she's really, really great at what she does. But no, I love that too about you. You're very straight to the point. You are. You really
Thank you.
are. And I appreciate that because when people aren't 100% honest and transparent, that's going back to what we said. How are you supposed to know, like, if you do suck or if you are mediocre or where you
Yeah,
do need to improve, you know?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, hey, if we're going to help somebody out, let's be honest about it so that we can actually help them out. Otherwise, why am I sitting in this chair?
Right, exactly. I feel the same way. The 100% the same way. Um Teresa says KPIs.
Mm. Is that for the term for metrics?
Well, no, she's probably talking about when we were talking about deliverables
Oh,
and
yeah.
people not meeting their expectations and because you know, key performance indicators are always like at the depending on what level you are and what meetings you're in, it's gonna always be the priority, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is at a CRO, at any level. And I get it. I mean, we can't just let people just go out and do whatever they want to do. I mean, I totally get that. You've
Right.
got to hold your team accountable as a manager.
Right. And
But
then there's the bottom line.
yeah,
We're not nonprofit.
exactly.
So, you know, we
Yeah.
have that.
But CROs have that. They drive that more. Sponsors have tight budgets, don't get me wrong, but they're looking for individuals that they're not going to put as many limitations as far as how many hours it takes to write a report or how much of this, that, or
Yeah.
the other, because they're really more focused typically, and I'm stereotyping, of course, but the sponsors that we work with are really more concerned with the quality of the data. And they want you to raise your hand if you get to the site and it's a mess and you need somebody to come in and help you co-monitor. And sometimes larger CROs aren't that open to those
Yeah.
types of discussions, you
Yeah.
know?
I agree. And I don't think you're stereotyping at all. I think we can find facts and evidence to support
Mhm.
this. This is just what it is. But it's
Mhm.
also because on the CRO side, how they get paid and how they generate revenue is totally different than on the
Agree.
sponsor side. So they do
Absolutely.
have to have like kind of different perspective and different priorities just based off of their business model.
I absolutely agree. And we're asked to do pricing like CROs sometimes. And I know all CROs don't price this way, but I know sometimes we're asked to price per unit. So we
Yeah.
would bill a flat fee for a site initiation visit. So whether it takes you as a CRA 16 hours to do the prep, the travel, the visit, the report writing, and the follow up, or 30 hours, I only get one fee for it. And
Right.
so, if a lot of CROs are asked to price that way, I totally get it. I mean, metrics, hey, I'm Lean and Six Sigma certified. I am never going to go on the record to say that metrics aren't important. But I do believe there's a time and a place for it. And
I
I think
agree.
you're trying to focus on culture fit, keeping your good CRAs. You got to be more than just metrics driven.
You
There
got
has to
to.
be
You
something
have
else
to.
there too.
Yeah. Yeah, because then it's also the quality, like you said, starts to go because it's we're human. We can only do so much. And
Yeah.
if you are expected to do like 4 visits in 1 week and get all those reports in on time, and then the next week you got 4 more visits, like something's gotta give.
Something will give. Unless you've got a fear of failure blocker and you're okay with working 100 hours a week.
It's not me.
Used to be me, not
And
anymore.
I was just about to say, and that did used to be me, like constantly just trying to always say yes, right? And that gets you into trouble too, because then they know, well, Jasmine is gonna say yes. So let's just give her this extra visit because we know she'll say yes. But you
Mhm.
have to also let that fear go and know when it's time to say no and set those boundaries too.
Well, and I know we're going to do a session on women in becoming professional women, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this topic. But that is where we as women, I think, have the biggest issue because we're so
I
used to
agree.
taking care of everyone else that we forget to take care of ourselves, and we really suck at saying no, right?
I agree.
Mm.
I agree. Not just at work, in our everyday lives, right? It's for me, especially with let's say certain family members, um, it's almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
Right? I literally talked to my therapist about this, and we have literally like sessions on how am I gonna be able to say no to not going to this family event. It's crazy, right?
You get really, really sick 2 minutes before you're supposed to leave the
Right?
house. You let everybody else go without you. You have crack open a bottle of Chardonnay, you get the chick flicks out. Yeah. Now I'm with you. It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to
Yeah.
draw the boundaries.
Yeah. Alicia says I don't suck at saying no. I can't please everyone. That's good for you, Alicia.
I
That's
know.
really good.
I need to sit down with you and you need to tell me how you do that.
We
Because
both do. We need to bring Alicia on and do a show with her so she can help us say
I
no.
agree. Yeah, maybe make sure that you come and you participate in when is that the one that we do on the women becoming
I think that's the last one. I think that's July 12th. Yeah,
because
July
that
12th.
it's hard. It is a it is secrets of a yeah. That one is really, really hard because we are discriminated against, period. I mean, women are, and then whenever you run your own business, most of us are trying to balance work and family. And so how do you do it all? Right? How do you get the groceries in and the house clean? And just in case you got visitors that drop by, and I'm always horrified. I'm like, oh my God, please nobody come by tonight because my house, like, it's like
You
8 o'clock,
wanna know
and
what I
still not
do?
made, and their dishes are stacked up.
You wanna know what I do? For unexpected guests, I hide. And I just tell I just want everybody to get real quiet, act like we are not at home.
My mom used to say, and I just started saying it, is, you're always welcome, but you weren't invited, so here's your mess.
Well, at least she says that, right? And that goes back to me being afraid to just tell them, like, no, we're busy. Like, now's not a good time. I literally, like, everybody gets quiet.
You're so funny.
No, seriously, that's literally what we do.
That's hysterical.
And yeah, right? It's funny. Even to the point where my daughter automatically knows, like, if the doorbell rings and we don't know who it is, like, she's quiet.
That's hysterical.
It is, but it also is like, it's kind of sad in a way that, like, just because I don't, and mine goes back to, everybody's different, but mine goes back to not wanting to disappoint people or not wanting
Mhm.
to say or do anything that might evoke like a sad feeling or response for them. That's where mine stems from.
Yeah. See, mine is conflict. I
Mm.
abhor, hate,
Mm.
hate it, which is stupid. You think I lived in IBM for 10 years dealing with very, very dominating men and I would be okay with conflict, but hate it. So that's always my thing, is worried about, oh, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that everybody else shares some of your reasons why you have challenges with saying no. We would love to hear that. Alicia says, I can help you. I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna know, seriously, I'm gonna connect with her because this is something that I see that a lot of women have challenges with. And she says this is so true.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, and so unfortunate at the same time. And then we have a comment from Jennifer. She said she used to be in the same position, but she started to think, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to?
That.
That is so, so good.
I've asked my husband that. I can do this, but that means I can't do that. And I've started saying that because then he gets to choose
That's so good.
what's more important. And it's not both.
No, we're going back to we're human. We're human, we have to face that fact. We have some limitations,
Mhm,
especially if you want to stay sane and healthy.
mhm.
So, no is definitely, you have to, right? Sometimes you have to say no. Um,
One
even
of
if
my
you have
coaches, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one of my coaches says, "Angela, if you don't take care of yourself, how are you going to keep taking care of everybody else?"
that's facts. That's facts, and I always say that saying no to something else is saying yes to yourself.
Mhm.
Saying yes to you prioritizing your self-care and taking care of yourself essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I
Yeah.
try to think about it in that way, but I'm not gonna lie, I still have, depending on who the person is now. Sometimes it depends on the person, I can just say no and move on and not skip a beat. But there's some people that it's just like, it just seems like it's so hard to say it. Even text it or send an email, it's like I find myself beating around the bush.
I had a friend of mine in Atlanta and she was one of those people you'd ask her if she wanted to do something or whatever. And her favorite saying was, I would rather sit at home and set my hair on fire.
Oh wow. Well, a simple no It can
But isn't that
surprise.
hysterical? Because if you just started saying that, people would just think it's funny, and then later they might get insulted, but they're gonna think it's funny
They
at
are.
first,
They
right?
are. You're right. Because they it is funny, but it is after you think about it, like, well, dang, is it that bad? Alicia says that's my motto. Um, but no, and even like last week when I felt like crap, I waited until like basically the last minute because I didn't want to say no.
Mhm.
But my body told me that I had to. So
Sometimes you have to, I mean, you gotta take care of yourself for sure, and we probably have a different audience than we had last week, but if you go into the perspective like we kind of started out on, is that everything happens for a reason, then this audience needed to hear this message. That
right.
audience can either listen to it on the recording or get it another time. Or
That's
maybe they
true.
didn't need it to begin with.
That's true. I firm believer in that too. Everything is working, right?
Mhm,
And Jan says it depends on the ask. That's true too.
mhm.
Um, and it would be interesting. Dance Fair, we had a conversation about this one time too, but it would be interesting to get the male's perspective on it and if they have a hard time saying no. So any men that are listening, please let us know if you have a hard time saying no, because I would be shocked if a man said, out of 10 men, I would be shocked if we had even one that said that they had a hard time. I feel like we need like, I don't know, like 100 or 1,000 to get that one.
That's a really good point. I would love to hear that as well because I know Mister over there. I mean, if he doesn't want to do it, he just says he's not going to do it.
Yeah, the same for
I'm
me
like,
too.
wait, what? I did this for you. I did that for you. I'm like, no, you have to do that. No, I don't want to do that. That doesn't
Yeah,
sound fun at all. So,
yeah, same same on my end. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear from men and what they have to say. And I try to keep track of the time. I said I was going to stop it at 8 because I know last time we did 2 hours, and I know you're busy, and we're coming back on Wednesday. So let's go through the hiring manager blockers since we went through the candidate blockers, right? Let's at least cover that. And the first one on the list is that I'm not confident or secure in my own capabilities.
mhm. That is a
And that's
really good problem.
on the
Mhm.
manager side, y'all. So talk about that one.
You guys, as job seekers, when you go in for the interview, do not assume that the person that you're talking to knows what they're doing, or don't assume that they're confident that they know what they're doing,
Right.
because both of those could sway the interview either way. So if they don't know what they're doing, and this is an issue with companies that have the HR person do the first interview,
I've seen that.
drives me absolutely crazy,
Yeah.
because other than just basic behavioral and what your salary expectations are, it's a waste of everybody's time. Unless that HR person is extremely involved in the day-to-day operations, which is extremely rare, it is a waste of time,
Yeah.
because they're not going to ask you anything that the hiring manager or the operations manager can ask you. So if but you could go in and the operations manager, and I've seen this before. We touched on this last week, to where you've got someone that went straight from a site into a CTM role at a sponsor or a CRO, and now they're interviewing CRAs. Understand that. You need to do the research on that person's profile. They're not going to know what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to make sure you relay the information in a way to where it's communicative, and you got to meet them where they are, which means you need to figure out where they are. Otherwise, it's not going to be a great interview.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that person may have a confidence issue, which means they're going to be looking for reasons to not like you, because you're going to show them up because you know more than they do.
Right. Right. And again, they might not even be aware that they're doing it.
Mhm.
They
Yeah,
might
exactly. It's
totally
unconscious. All these
totally
blockers are unconscious. They operate in the background, and they make you make decisions that you don't even know consciously you're making.
right. And I'm glad you bring that point up because there's so many people that I talk to that are shocked when they hear that about the recruiters, that most of them they might have never even been in the clinical research space
Mhm.
or any type of science space or anything like that. They might have literally come from finance, for example, and now they're interviewing you. So like you said, when you're having these conversations, don't take it for granted that they know what you're talking about when you're throwing out acronyms, or when you just like kind of blurt out all the things that you've done but you don't really put any context or substance behind it. We got to stop doing that because
Mhm.
um you put yourself at a disadvantage because they're new, they don't know, so they don't really understand what you're saying, but maybe they're insecure like you said, and they're not going to ask questions, so they're just nodding their head and you think it's going great and it's not.
I absolutely agree. I mean, absolutely. I mean, look at their profile to begin with. A good agency, if you're being represented by a really good agency, they'll give you the LinkedIn profiles of the individuals that you'll be speaking with, so that because you may not have access to them if they're not in your network. So make sure they give them to you if you can, because that way you can look and see what is their education, how long have they been with the company,
Right.
what did they do before they got there. What you have to do whenever you go into these interviews is to build a connection. It's a first date. You're sitting at a barista having a cup of coffee, sharing stories about what you love about this industry. That is going to be what connects you to. If they don't, if you know, don't assume that they know what SDV is or they have any idea what an RBM model is.
Right.
They don't assume they know those things. You've got to tell stories. Whenever they talk to you about a challenge at a site, tell them a real story and how you dealt with it. Be genuine, be personable, make them fall in love with you because you're just a really cool person that just happens to know what the heck you're talking about.
Right, right. And Jakia says, wow. Alicia says, I absolutely love these sessions. They're helping me so much. Thanks, Alicia. That's what we're here for. And then Jakia also has another comment. She says she had a recruiter to tell her one time that RBM, for those of you who don't know, risk-based monitoring is not clinical research. I asked the recruiter if they knew what RBM is, and to my surprise, they had no clue.
You just proved our blocker theory. Go, Jackie.
Right? And
Yeah.
instead of like, and it's I'm so glad you asked if they knew Jakia, because what if you didn't? And then they're just like confused, right?
And they would have
Um,
downgraded you on that answer.
right.
And that's really the issue with these and I get recruited 15 times a day from these people, these dedicated remote recruiters for hire, and they're just trying to rush to get a placement. That's why you got to be real picky about the recruiters that you work with. And even some of our really big competitors, I call them soup to nuts recruiter. You got an Angela Roberts sitting at her desk. She recruited janitors this morning, IT professionals this afternoon. They've recruited a CRA or a CTM sometime this week. They've done this, that, or the other. How in the world are they going to know SAS program or SAP or whatever? And I mean, you need to pick a recruiter that knows your industry so that they know how competent you are. And
Absolutely.
that's the key, isn't it?
Right. Absolutely, 100%. And I'm so glad it's just so much in what you said that I don't even know where to begin, because it's like, first of and well, let me say Alicia's comment. She said, I have an interview this Wednesday for a CTM role and these tips are on point. Great. I'm so glad that this will help prepare you for your interview. But going back to what I was about to say, like, why do you think, well, first, can we maybe solve this issue on the recruiter side? And why do you think companies maybe hire recruiters that aren't well versed in the field?
Maybe they don't know any different. I don't know. I don't know why a sponsor would hire a recruiter that doesn't know boo about clinical research. Because a recruiter can ruin a company's brand in a very quick heartbeat,
Mm,
you know? But I also know this, there are a lot of people that want to break into the recruiting world and they will pretend to recruit jobs they don't have, and then
mm,
they will reach out and they'll try to convince the sponsor, "Hey, I got all these candidates for you if you will just hire us as a recruiting agency."
mm,
So you have them on the back end too. you know Find someone that's reputable, that's been in the industry for a minute. Do a digital footprint search on the recruiting agency just like we would do on you. If you
that's
go out
great
and look at
advice.
Angela Roberts, put me in Boolean, like in quotes, and then Ann, and then put clinical research, you're going to tell them the real deal, right? Don't confide your career in an agency that doesn't have a reputation and that doesn't know this industry. You're asking for someone to represent you that doesn't have the language to represent you. It's a silly tactic.
Mm. That's so good, and I'm so glad you said that, because that's something that I always encourage with my coaching clients as a part of the process, is that you, yes, they're interviewing you and they're considering you and all that stuff. Yes, whatever. But on the flip side, you should be doing the same thing. Just like how they're looking you up on LinkedIn, you look them up.
Exactly.
They're researching you, you research them, right? That's such a
Mhm.
great tip.
Yeah, yeah. It's a respect thing too. If they don't know what they're doing, how long is that sponsor gonna respect the people that they submit over there?
Yeah.
How are they picking the right ones?
Yeah. I agree. And then going back to what you said about the company's not, like how a recruiter can essentially like make or break a company's
Mhm.
brand. Do you think that the higher ups, the executive C-suite people, do they not understand and get how important recruiters are to their brand?
I don't know. I know for smaller to medium-sized companies, I think they get it. But I know that we've worked with some really large companies that we don't work with anymore because we could not find people who wanted to work for them.
Mm.
And a
That's
lot of it had
crazy.
to do with the recruiting agencies. I mean, it's a dog eat dog world. I mean, you got recruiters that'll like make 100, phone calls a day. They'll tell you about this great opportunity. They'll try to negotiate the candidate really low. They're going to bill the client as high as they can. There's a lot of unethical processes that happen in our world, in the recruiting world.
Mm.
And then whenever they can't place you, they drop you like a hot potato. You never hear from them again. I mean, how often are you blaming the recruiter or are you blaming the sponsor? And then a lot of times the recruiter will say, well, they just don't want to move forward. Well, it may very well be because that recruiting company wasn't the sponsor's recruiting company. It might have been that ploy situation to where they were trying to get in to the sponsor, and the
Yeah.
sponsor said, no, I'm happy with Angela, we're not going with somebody else."
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
no,
they go
yeah.
back to all their candidates and say they decided they don't like you, they're going to move on for somebody else, and then you were never submitted, right? You just don't know. There's a lot of shenanigans that go on. You just need to be really careful about the recruiters that you put your trust in.
Mm, and that's such a great tip, because I don't think people even think about the other side, and
Mhm.
how all these shenanigans are going on in the background, because we assume these companies, they're running a trial. They should at least know how to hire people, right?
Well, but it's the same thing as operations managers in large CROs. They take great CRAs and make them leads. And then they take great leads and they make them managers. And then they tell you to go figure it out,
That's
right?
unfortunately that's what happens.
It happens everywhere. So it's the same thing, right? I mean, just because you're an operations manager doesn't mean that you know how to interview legally, that you know how to hire legally, that you know how to motivate your team, you know how to hold them accountable. I mean, you don't know how to do any of that stuff unless someone's shown you how to do that stuff,
And I
right?
like how you added legally, because
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story, right? A whole
Yeah.
nother conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, that's so good. And even me, sometimes I forget. And I think it also goes back to the fact that we forget sometimes that the recruiters, the hiring managers, these are people too, just like us.
Yeah.
And the same thoughts and stuff that's going on in our head, they have them. Some of them, they might have a full schedule that day. They don't even want to be on the call, or there's
Mhm.
somebody's backup who got sick and they're out and they're mad that they're even there,
They might not be
or
prepared because of it.
not prepared, right? They might have
Mhm.
never seen your resume or CV. A lot of times I'll get people that come to me and say, especially people that have experience, and say, I just don't understand why I got to always repeat what's on my resume. And I just try to be patient and explain why. But going back to the dating thing, if I just met you and we're going on a date and you don't even want to tell me about yourself, like what are we doing here?
Exactly. I'm absolutely with you. I'm happy to tell my story.
Right. I don't want you
What do
to
you
send
want
me
to
a
know?
resume and say, well, look it up before we go to dinner. Like, what?
Have you done your homework?
Right.
Well,
Like,
if you had read my resume, you would know I have 9 years of oncology experience.
we are laughing, but I've literally had somebody that came to me and they said that they've said that to the recruiter. And I'm
I've
like,
had people say that to me too. And I always have the resume front. And I will tell you, we spend a good amount of time prepping for every single one of our interviews. We have a screen form we go through, and what we're not sure, and we have to question like why you left, and if it was a contract could have extended, and all of these types
I've
of things that
I've been
help.
through it. It's
Yeah,
expensive.
you've been through it. Yeah. So, but we spend time preparing for that,
Mhm.
but every recruiter doesn't. But with that being said, if I'm backing up, because I think you talked to Natalie, right? So if I'm backing Natalie up, I'm going to have 8 interviews on my calendar. 8. And I got to prep for every single one of them. It's going to take me 30 to 45 minutes to prep for every single one. Every single one of the interviews, yours with her was probably around 45 minutes, right? So then you got another 45 minutes. So that's an hour and a half per person. That's 8 times an hour and a half. That's a long day.
A long day, right? And you're one of the great people, the
Thank
great
you.
recruiters, right? But what about those that they're like, "I'm not preparing. I'm just gonna get on and wing it."
And they do.
They
They
do.
really do.
I've
Yeah.
had some interviews where I knew they I just knew they were winging it.
And not just third party recruiters like our firm, but corporate recruiters.
Corporate recruiters,
Yeah,
yes,
for
winging
the
it
actual
too.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people will rise to what they're being held accountable for. Whenever we worked for the large CROs that we finally ditched, what we found is that the corporate recruiters that managed us, they were just held accountable for closing the requisitions. They weren't held accountable for attrition levels. If
Yeah.
they hired CRAs and those CRAs didn't make it for like 30 days or whatever, they weren't held accountable. People
Yeah.
are we're going to rise to what they're held accountable to.
Yeah,
And so again,
unfortunately.
yeah, so that's another really great question is, hey, Ange, what do you hold your recruiters accountable to? Well, what I hold my recruiters accountable to is their attrition rate. It's not the number of placements they make, it's the number of placements that
Mm,
stick.
and so then they take more time, pay more attention, look for the quality people, the right people, the culture fit. They take all those things in consideration versus who can I get in this to fill this spot as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes a huge difference. And then one of the things that you brought up about this particular blocker that managers might have is not just on the hiring side, but if you're already an employee,
Hmm.
your line manager, for example, you talked about how it could manifest as micromanagement or as critical management, right?
Yeah. Yeah, or sabotage even, but
Sabotage,
micromanagement for
right?
sure. Yeah, and I am always in whenever someone tells me that they don't like to be micromanaged, I wonder. I'm always now I'm on the fence. Well, is it because you need to be micromanaged, or is it because you had one of those managers that just did? Because it goes both ways, right? And but yeah, a manager that lacks a lot of confidence is very likely to micromanage you, and if they see that you're exceeding their competency, often they'll try to sabotage you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that unfortunately we have to keep in mind too. So your manager's comments may not have anything to do with you. It could just be their own
Mhm.
insecurities, their own lack of confidence, right?
Mhm. Could absolutely be. And maybe
Yeah.
they just don't know what your job is, and they're trying to make out like they do.
That too, God forbid. Because no, sometimes I've had a manager before, a line manager that was coming from a different industry. And she had not been a monitor or a study coordinator or see like nothing. Everybody was shocked as to how this person got this line manager role, probably because she was great at branding and marketing and selling herself. Had
Mhm.
to be right. Um, and just had no clue. So half the time when we met it, I felt like it was me training training her.
Which is fine if she's practicing her grateful exercise every day, and she's grateful for you, Jasmine, because she's learning so much in the industry, right? But if she feels like you're making her look bad, again,
That's
you're
another story,
blaming
yeah.
someone else. You're not looking internally. You're blaming someone else, and she's running a self-defeating habit pattern that is going to negatively impact you as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And Victoria says, I've dealt with the sabotage before.
I have too. I
Yeah.
did. I worked for a manufacturing company way back before I went back to UNC in Charlotte to get my second bachelor's and my master's degree, and I was programming for them, and I had just fallen into the job. I'd started out as an office manager, and I just had fallen into this programming job, and just I mean it just stuck to me like glue. I mean, it was just like everything synced. It was like I was wired to program, right? And the director fell in love with my work, and he was moved to another manufacturing company like a couple towns away, and he took me with him to start their programming division, doing the CADs and all that stuff in their manufacturing. And my manager was mad, and she did
Mm,
everything she could to get me fired before I left there.
mm,
Mhm.
mm. So how did you navigate that
Well,
specific?
she's a mean girl. I just pretended that she didn't exist until I left.
Did that prompt you to start looking elsewhere?
No, I mean, I knew my exit was imminent because I was leaving that manufacturing building, and I was actually moving to another. I was going to have to commute further, but I was actually going to
Okay.
another division to help him start up that programming center there. So I knew my exit was imminent. So I just had to hang tight. And I think a lot of times that's my advice is hang tight. If you're seeing it, somebody else is.
Okay. So you don't necessarily automatically say you need to go. You need to find something else.
No, I mean, obviously, you don't need to subject yourself to abuse, but I think there's something, and I think I used this word the last time we talked, but that stick to itiveness. You have an opportunity
Yeah.
to learn something there,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
have an opportunity to prove something to yourself. Hang tight.
That's true. Because the times when I've had micromanagers or challenging managers, whatever you want to call them, sabotaging managers, there's always a lesson.
Hmm.
When you're in it, you might can't always see it now. But after you get on the other side, then there's always a lesson that you can take from the situation.
And it's a victory too. And
Definitely a
and
victory.
yeah, and if they're behaving that way, they're extremely unhappy. They're probably looking.
Yeah. And it's most of the time, I'm not gonna say always, because sometimes, you can just be a bad employee. But when you are in that situation, it's not you. It's going back to this whole conversation. It's something personal with them, some type of blocker that they're
Right.
experiencing. So don't take it personal.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Regina says, I've been through this before too. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure a lot of people can say that they've experienced
Mhm.
some type of situation where their manager, God forbid, is trying to sabotage them. And then one of the other blockers that we talked about that you wanted to talk about on this side was the lack of trust.
Mhm.
The lack of trust. So talk about that and how it's experienced coming from the manager side.
I think every job seeker on this call and anyone that listens to this recording needs to remember that every manager that comes to the interview table is bringing baggage with them.
Mm, mm.
Now, if the position that you're applying for is a position because of growth, then maybe it's a little bit different. But if you're backfilling someone, there's a problem there, and you're being brought in to solve that problem, and if you don't fit their niche of how they can trust you to solve that problem because they've just had to fire someone, and they something's a mess and something's got to be cleaned up, or somebody caused a disruption within the organization or whatever it was, they're not going to trust automatically that you can solve that problem. And unfortunately, a lot of times you're going to be going in blind. Whenever
Yeah,
we prepare you for interviews, we tell you why the position's open. And again, this is why you got to make sure you're working with the right agency. Ask the agency, why is the position open? And if it's
yeah,
a backfill, find out what you can about. And it's not so that you can gossip, and you need to be very open. I don't need to gossip. I just need to understand what baggage the hiring team's going to have when I walk in there. Was the person late on their reports? What did they not know what they were doing? Were they, what was the problem? Why did they let them go? Because even though I'm not going to call out that I know you fired Angela because she was late on reports, I can at least express my capabilities and time management, organizational skills, and meeting my deliverables and that type of thing, because you can't think that the hiring manager is going to trust you just because you walk through that door for an interview. Understanding the background will go a long way towards kind of softening whatever baggage they're bringing into the room with them.
right. I agree 100%. And for the people that are literal, you did not mean use the word baggage to the recruiter. Don't say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Because you got to be literal. You got to
Thank
you
you.
know be. Yes, do not use those. Going back to what we said earlier, it's positive only, positive vibes only. Do not use that word baggage. That's the motivation behind it, but don't say that to them. Please don't.
Yeah.
Um, so then do you recommend, because I've encouraged people to just flat out ask, are you backfilling for the position, or is this a position due to growth, a new contract, a new project, new opportunity? Is it okay to just flat out ask that question?
Absolutely.
Okay. And for the people that are like, what is backfill?
Well, that means you're replacing someone who got fired or someone who quit. And it's
Exactly. And
always good to know why they got fired or why they quit. And again, it's
right.
not so that you can gossip. I mean, you certainly want to go about it the right way. And if you can get the information from the recruiter before the interview, that is the perfect scenario
Perfect scenario.
because to Jasmine's point, then you can prepare for it. You know, if it's whatever caused the person to quit or to be fired, hey, you're armed. You now know how to articulate the fact that, and again, you want to say, hey, look, I know you fired Angela because that's not what I'm telling you to say. But what you can say is, if whenever you know that Angela was fired because she was late on her reports, you could talk about your methodology for making sure you're never delinquent on your deliverables.
Right. Right. And keep honing in on that point throughout the conversation, right?
Hmm.
Trying
Yeah,
to, if you know that, then you can tie lots of different behavioral situational
agree.
questions, pretty much a lot of different things you can tie into. And this is how I'm always on time with my
Yeah,
with my reports, right? You could always bring it back to that point.
that's exactly right. Because now you know what the issue is.
Right.
I mean, listen, you're already competent or we wouldn't be representing you. Now you've just got to navigate the dynamics of the personalities,
That's
the
it.
personal realities that cause the personalities, right? I mean, that whole scenario you've got to navigate.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. I agree 100%. And it's going back to what we talked about even last week, and how you want to tell that story and you want to show how you're solving their problem and bringing
mhm,
value to them. That's what it all
mhm,
boils down to. So
yeah,
if you can get that piece of information, oh my God, that's gold, right? Because now you know their specific problem and you can present in a very specific, customized, tailored way on how you can help solve that problem.
absolutely. And we tell our candidates and we give them an interview prep before the interview to talk to them about the situation, the culture, the baggage, all of those types of things. And that's when we also talk about the people you're going to be speaking with. And I see where Teresa's asking, I ask whomever's
Answer
interviewing
that
me, do they
question.
tell the truth? I don't know if they will or not. Ask your recruiter, because if someone's representing you, it behooves them to tell you the right answer, because we only make our money if we place you. So if you got a recruiter who's not telling you, they either don't know, they're running a blocker, you know, but if you can get it from the recruiter up front, you're going to be even better prepared, because then you're just going to connect because you're solving all their problems,
Right.
right? And
Right.
it's magical to them.
And does that apply on this, like the I don't know the terms for the recruiting world, okay? But that, does that apply for like the companies where they're hiring in through, the recruiters are internal recruiters and
The
they're
corporate
hiring for
recruiters.
that
Mhm.
corporate recruiters. Thank you for correcting me. Does that apply to them as well? Do they only get paid if they
No,
hire?
most of the corporate, that's a good question. Most of the corporate recruiters are going to be on a salary, and I don't know that a lot of companies pay commission, even though they probably get bonus structures or what have you. But
Mhm.
most corporate recruiters are held accountable for closing requisitions. So they're
Okay.
still responsible for closing the job. They're still responsible for getting that hire through.
Okay. So
Uh,
it's not maybe like the same way that you guys get paid, but they still have some type of metric surrounding,
mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
to hold them accountable. Okay.
Yeah. Now they may not know the politics internally. If and we don't work with a lot of companies where we work with HR. We most of the time we work directly with operations, and that's the perfect scenario because my friend from company ABC is going to call me and say, "And first of all, I need you to fire Jasmine because now I need a backfill." Okay, well, I know what happened because I just fired Jasmine and I'm very well
Yeah.
aware of what we had to do. Or we had to put someone on a cure plan because they were behind or they weren't meeting expectations or whatever. I'm very much involved with that, and that's where, depending on the relationship between the recruiter and, the company, it might vary. If you got an internal recruiter, they're not behaving like HR. We behave like HR. So whenever we're putting a consultant out in the field, and most of our placements are consultants, we're
Mm,
managing them from an HR perspective. So if there's an issue, we're very much aware of it. So if there's
mm,
a turnover, someone has had to leave or they've been terminated, we're very well aware of those circumstances, and we can coach you when you go into that interview so you know why the position is open, and that is gold.
that is gold.
Mhm,
Um, so it is a little bit different depending on if
mhm,
you're being represented by a corporate recruiter, someone internal
mhm.
hiring internally, or if you're being represented by an agency.
Yeah.
Um, but it's still the bottom line, right? You would hope that they're being honest and telling the truth.
I at least ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely
Mhm.
ask. And then, so how do you think that impacts if they have this lack of trust blocker, right? And then coupling that, I don't want to, talk about the fraudulent area yet, since we have a whole topic on that. But coupled with that, do you think that that is making recruiters and hiring managers more or less trusting of candidates?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't I think that whenever you have got a company culture where the hiring team lacks trust, it probably is because they've been burned in some form or fashion. But most of the time that
Mhm.
translates into extra interviews. We have a company that does video assessments. They'll put you on video and give you an assessment that's going to take 90 minutes for you to take. They just add more layers into the hiring process.
Mm,
And, candidates, sometimes they're just like, well, I'm not doing that, but it's because they think it's about them. It's not about the CRA. It's because the company has baggage and they're trying to make sure that the next hire they make is a good hire, and so again, just when you go into those situations, knowing if that's an issue has nothing to do with you as a candidate. It has to do with what that company or that hiring team has been through and what they're trying to avoid repeating, and perhaps they're solving the problem in a way that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, you
right,
know? Because if you're hired into a situation where you've got a hiring manager that doesn't trust you because they've had a really bad situation, we can coach you on how to navigate that. I mean, now you're having that dialogue with the person of, how can I meet your expectations? You tell me what you're looking for me. What kind of checkpoints can we do so I can prove
right.
you that I'm meeting your expectations? There's a way to navigate that once you get in. The key is getting in. And
Yeah,
whatever background you can gather to begin with will make a huge difference.
right. And I know I've ran into some CRAs that they've, were told they had to do the assessment thing, and they're like, I'm not even going to do it just because they think that that represents how the company operates once you get in. And they're like, if they're making the interview process this complicated and hard, then I can only
I've heard that
imagine how
too.
it is as an employee. So a
Yeah.
lot of times they don't want to proceed just because they think that it's like it's a part of the company's culture as to where they're like just doing too much all the time.
And that isn't typically the case. It's usually that block up front, but I mean, I understand why they would think that, but that isn't always the case.
Yeah, yeah, I found that too. But then to that point, I wonder if companies are weeding out really great candidates and kind of limiting themselves just because, again, I get it.
Yeah.
There's all these different reasons why people we do what we do. Because I've seen it where they've asked CRAs to present, like do a whole presentation. I've had a couple of CRAs that had to do that. The video thing is big now, where you have to submit a video of like your story and kind of like an interview video, but you're
Yeah.
submitting it. I've seen that now too. But to your point, don't take it personal, right?
Yeah.
It's not because they're a crazy hard micromanaging company.
It's not
Um,
necessarily an indication of the operations.
right,
Mhm. Yeah.
right. And it's not
Mhm.
an indication of lack of trust, even. It could just be boil down to trying to verify and confirm that, you can do what you say you can do, you are who you say you are.
Absolutely.
Um,
And whenever we have clients that go those extra miles, I've got recruiters that used to think, "Well, don't they trust us?" I mean, you've been through our process. It's not like it's a cakewalk, right? I'm like, "Dude, we
exactly.
really? You're questioning me?" And it's that same
Yeah.
thing. I'm like, "Get over yourself, right? This is not about your ego at all."
Yeah, I don't see how they could question your process because it's very thorough, everybody. But no, and I can appreciate that though. So yeah, it's just all so interesting how there's so many things at play, right?
Hmm.
Outside of the two people that might be having, or three or four people that might be in the conversation, outside of that, in the background, there's all these other factors, right?
It's very
That are
strategic. Yeah.
that are into play. And unfortunately, as candidates, we don't always understand that. And we
Hmm.
take it on ourselves and we start, feeling bad and hopeless. And why don't, all the things we've been talking about today start coming
It
up,
feeds
right?
the blockers you
It
already have
feeds them.
operating, doesn't it?
It
Mhm.
feeds them. Absolutely. Victoria says, if there is a constant turnover at a company, how is the company holding the managers
We're
accountable?
gonna have to have 2 hours for that topic 'cause that is actually why we don't work for some companies, because they don't.
Mm.
And you whenever you and I had our very first discussion way back, whenever before we even did that podcast on a Saturday that you ended up
Mhm.
breaking into 3 parts, and all we had that discussion, right?
We
Where,
did.
we kinda talked on it just here is, again, they take great CRAs, they make you leads. They take lead CRAs, they make you managers, and then they just throw you out to the wolves. Whenever I was a manager for IBM, and I hold my team accountable to this too, I was held accountable to my team's attrition rate. If someone quit, or if I had to fire them because I couldn't develop them, I was held accountable to that number as a manager. And it was part of my performance review, and it impacted my bonus. And if it was real bad, it impacted my job. Now on the flip
Mm.
side, I was also celebrated if I promoted people out of my now if I promoted people out of
Mm.
my team, I was given a big pat on the back. And a lot of times I was given a bonus for that.
Oh,
But
wow.
but if people quit because I wouldn't promote them and they went somewhere else, and I was held accountable for it. That is a sign of a mature organization. They made us take management classes. Every month, I traveled to Atlanta before I lived there to the IBM facility on Windy Hill, and I would take these management. They called them Big Blue courses. They would give you these management classes to where you would learn how to assess people's personalities, how you learn to motivate them, how you learn to help understand their learning styles, so you could help teach them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They took it seriously, and we're a
Wow.
great company. But we miss that in this industry. We miss it seriously in this
We do.
industry.
We really need to get with you and the IBM folks and figure out how we can, no, seriously, because, and we talked about this before too, figuring out how we can maybe do something on the company side, because at the end of the day, candidates can be doing all the things, right? Everything we're talking about, but it's still another problem that still needs to be addressed, and
I
that's on
agree.
the company's side.
Yeah,
And I've never heard somebody being awarded even just a simple congratulations for promoting somebody on their team. And that I could see how that model will definitely encourage managers to train and support their people and help
absolutely.
them. They're actually having these coaching conversations you're supposed to have
Yeah,
in your performance reviews.
exactly. We would have
They would,
succession planning. Is when Angela gets promoted, who's going to replace you? Angela, who are you working on? Who's your replacement?
wow. And I've never, not in our industry, I've never heard anybody say anything like that.
And it's a kudos, right? Because then as an employee, because you don't, seriously, I've said this in a joking way, but you don't wake up one day and become a CRA.
Right.
You have to be developed, and you can take all these classes, and that gives you a wonderful foundation. But the on the job work is what gets it there.
Yeah,
And
you just
you
can't
got to
do it.
have people mentoring you and coaching you and developing you, right?
You got to. And in any level, whether you're a CTA, a study coordinator,
Agreed.
UTM project, like we all need the training, the support, the guidance. It doesn't matter how many books you read, how many trainings you take. When you get that on the job experience and that on the job support, it's a different level.
I agree. Yeah.
And then unconscious bias is another thing that hiring managers they face as well, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier, but that's something else that's on the hiring side, another
Yeah.
blocker.
It really is, and we did talk about that in the context of discrimination. But ageism is a real thing. Um, Looking for years of experience instead of competency. It's a real thing. Seeing gaps in the resume and then automatically assuming the worst. And I do tell people that don't let me use my imagination because it's going to run the wrong way. So you always want to make sure I know
Yeah.
what's going on with
Yeah.
you. But there's bias. There's bias in interviewing, body language bias. You know,
Mm.
how someone's sitting, how someone, if someone's not meeting me eyeball to eyeball, I honestly immediately don't trust them. But they may just be extremely shy. It could have taken every fiber of their being to just be on the interview with me, right? So training a hiring manager to understand that so that you can step aside of that bias can make a really big difference as well. But those are things that candidates need to be aware exist, and give the hiring manager a break, as well, because you could, I've said this to be, wow, you look like you're really nervous to somebody that's interviewing me. Why not? You're trying to build a relationship. You're a human. Why can't you have a human conversation with them? You look really nervous. I'm so sorry. You're about as nervous as I am. Have a joke about it. Open up the gates, have a conversation. But there
Yeah.
are ways that you can navigate that too.
So true. Alicia says preach. You're preaching right now, Angela.
I just talk
Um,
fast like a Southern preacher. I'm not.
no, you are preaching. No, these are very helpful tips, and not just that, they're facts.
Hmm.
And both sides, if we could come together, we could really make a huge change in the industry, right?
I agree.
Um, and then this person says, I get a lot of questions for the gap in my CV. Do you know I had somebody that came to me and said the recruiter gave them a hard time because they had a 3-week gap?
See, I actually look at CVs that have zero gaps with distrust. This is an industry that we work and live in this industry. I call it the hurry up and wait industry. I was going to make bumper stickers. I think it would be funny, right? I live in clinical research, the hurry up and wait industry. Yeah, projects get put on hold. Companies lose their funding. The FDA comes in and the trains stop on the tracks. I mean, you know, PPD just laid off how many contractors? Every
And
single
then,
one of them are
and
going to
that's
have a gap.
that's another topic for another day. But why do they do that and then hire a whole new team of people the next month, Angela? Why?
I have theories. We should add that to the other discussion. But
Yes, I'm just so lost and confused. I don't get it.
but it is tough, isn't it? And gaps need to be explained. But if you've got a recruiter that's giving you a hard time for a 3-week gap, then they do not understand this industry, and you need to find another recruiter.
That's what I said. That is not somebody you want to work with if we are focusing on a 3-week gap.
Yeah,
Seriously.
yeah,
It's
that's
like,
silly. Yeah,
what
that's
have we
absolutely
come
silly.
to when a
Mhm,
3-week gap is a problem, right?
mhm.
So that's a one-off. So what would you say is a gap that should be explained? Like what amount of time?
I
Um,
think anything that's, I mean, anytime if you're permanent, you have to couple the answers on the reasons why you left to coincide with your gap, right? What I don't want to hear you say is that you left a company because you wanted to experience new growth and then you had a 6-month gap. Okay, well, I don't know what kind of growth you're experiencing sitting your little happy ass on the couch, but that is not going to make it for me because that's just not the way it works, right? Now, if you needed to take that 6 months off to take care of your kid or your parent, or maybe you just needed some personal health, well,
yeah, some
be
break, yeah,
honest with
break.
me,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, but I get that a lot, is that, well, I wanted a career growth, or I just felt like they weren't paying me enough, and then they're out of work. It's somebody that applied for a recruiting job, and she's a single mom, and she was 4 months without work. Now, you and I both know how desperate that lady was, had to have been, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I asked her, why did she leave the other job? Well, because it had moved down to part time, and I wasn't making enough money to make ends meet. And I'm like,
So
but
zero
but then
dollars
you
was
quit.
better. $0 is better than some part-time money?
Just make sure your story makes sense,
Makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
Regardless of how long the gap is, just be honest about it. But be honest, if you decided to go back to school, tell them you went back to school.
Right.
You had an aging parent. My mom had cancer 3 times last year.
Mm.
That's a really reasonable reason to take time off from work,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Maybe you were burned out and you needed some mental health time.
Right. And
Talk
don't be
about it.
afraid to say that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But talk about how you're ready to go back to work, right? And what you learned from that time and how you stayed involved in the industry. And you got to be real open. What I'm looking for is trends, right? If your typical tenure as a perm, contract's different, but if your typical tenure as a perm is like a year and a half, 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 that's a problem for me.
Yeah.
Because it's that stick to itiveness that we just talked about. You're going to have peaks and valleys in your position that are going to be tough. If you want to grow your career, you're going to have to learn how to work through the challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true that everything is working and it's all a part of the plan.
Yeah.
And then that I guess the not being enough could maybe factor into
May-
that a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's all like intertwined, right?
But now you're feeding into that, right? You're not good enough, and so you quit rather than because you don't. Instead of try. I mean, at least try, right? I mean, stick to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's never going to be perfect, and there are going to be jobs you have to leave. There are,
Right.
but if it's a trend, look here.
Right.
Don't blame your
Right.
manager,
Right.
right?
Right. I agree 100%. And Teresa says, is a change from an Apple employee to a PV, pharmacovigilance, for those who don't understand, suspect for a hiring manager.
I would not be able to answer that question. I'm not really sure. I mean, if you got the education, I don't know what the level is or anything. I guess I would have to have more context. It's not a world I live in from the pharmacovigilance side, so I don't know if you have an answer to
Um,
that.
I think, and for people who don't know, pharmacovigilance is just drug safety. I think maybe she might be putting it at the angle from, like, you know how with the quote unquote fraudulent CRAs, you'll see that they worked at AT&T and then all of a sudden they're like a senior CRA, like that, you know, the next month or whatever. Maybe she's coming from that angle, is like, it's completely different industry. And then like, how did you make the switch? How did you change? And so they might have some unconscious bias there and thinking that, can I trust you? Are you really real? Like, how did you make this change? Maybe she's talking about that.
Well, if that is the scenario, telling me you were an Apple employee yesterday and now you're drug safety and this is why you think you can do the job, that's not fraudulence. What we deal with is people that worked at the Apple store or the iPad store or were truck drivers and they don't tell us that and they try to wipe out their digital footprint and then create a whole fake one with Zoom Info and Signal Hire and all these other companies out there that make them look like they've been in the industry when they really haven't been. Those are two different scenarios to me. Honesty is always the best policy. You want to change your career. I
Yeah.
was in IT before I came here, completely different career path.
Yeah.
I have nothing wrong with being your own doppelganger
Yeah,
at
I
all.
agree. And that goes back to when we talked about earlier that people think that they have to make up stuff or
Mhm,
lie, going back to being not enough, when you can be honest. You can just simply
mhm,
go, oh, Teresa says resume wise. But no, I don't think that makes you suspect.
mhm.
Just because you're coming from Apple to PV.
No.
And then Jesse says, how do you tease out the difficulties of a role without coming off as negative? For example, applying to a position that you find out has had a ton of turnover, 2 to 3 different employees within a year. Without a recruiter, you really have to rely on the team/hiring manager's information, but sometimes it's hard to assess just what exactly you're attempting to step into without coming off as a negative, too nosy candidate.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, and you, I mean, there's nothing wrong with you asking to speak to get a reference from internal the company. We have that sometimes to where someone wants to speak with one of our CRAs just to see whether or not they want to trust us to represent them.
So
If
you
I'm
feel like,
interested in representing the candidate, I'm going to let them speak to one of my CRAs, obviously, because I ask for references. Why shouldn't they ask for references for
right,
me?
right.
But Jesse, you also can't assume that this hiring team's not running blockers. If they've got that kind of attrition level, it might be them. It might not be the CRAs that left. It might be them. So, I
That's
mean, I,
true.
I think it's fair to ask the question. And then if you don't get an offer, then consider that a bullet dodged.
That's true. So it is fair for us as candidates to ask,
Yes,
can
ma'am.
I speak to one of the CRAs? Can I speak to one of whatever role you're applying to? Can I speak to someone in that
Yeah,
role?
I would love to speak to another team member to understand the culture because I want to be here for the long term. And that means that I've got a decision to make just like you do.
Right.
I
And
think
I
it's a
think
fair question.
I think also candidates think that they maybe don't have rights, and I use that term because I don't know what else to use, but they don't think that as a candidate you have the right to ask these types of questions.
Well, if a candidate is a subpar candidate and they're asking me to jump through hoops, I'm going to tell them no because they're not worth it, right? So not for me. I mean, if I'm already kind of on the fence on representing them, or if they didn't do well with their references or their competency was kind of weak, and they're like, well, before I let you represent me, I'm thinking to myself, well, haven't really decided to represent you yet. I mean, so you have to meet the manager where they are. But Jesse, if you made a really good impression and they want you, let them chase you, and they will if they want you. If they've had that kind of turnover and you're knocking their socks off, it is absolutely well within. You're interviewing that company too. You're making a decision. I consider a permanent job like marriage. You're making a vow and a commitment to that company, and they're making a vow and a commitment to you. And if both parties are looking at it from that perspective, it is a marriage made in heaven, right? I mean, you guys are going to be cohesive. You're going to learn. They're going to learn. You're going to work together. It's going to be beautiful. So don't think you don't have the right to ask those questions. Now, they have the right to tell you no, but I consider that a dodged bullet.
Yeah, I agree. And because it really is that lets me know from an employee side that, hey, they really want to make sure this is a good fit. And that's good because they want
Yeah,
to make sure that they stay, right?
exactly.
So would you recommend that, to Jesse's question, that we reserve this question until after the offer is presented?
I would. Yeah. I mean, I would ask internally and say, well, do you mind telling me why the position's open? And then if they give you fluff, then, depending on I mean, it's always hard, right? I hate answering hypothetical questions, but, depending on the rapport you built, you can just say, look, and then you can just again, be transparent. I just really want to make sure that this is a match where I'm in, I'm all in. I just want to make sure that I am clear on what your needs are. And if you've had attrition, there's a reason for it. And it would be really good for me to know what it is before I step
Yeah.
into this. And
Yeah.
then just be very candid and transparent. Again, they have the right to ignore you or ignore your question or refuse to answer it, but then you know where you stand with them.
Yeah. I agree. No, that's so true. Um, well, I'm looking at the time. We're after 9. I said we weren't gonna go this long, right? We
You're going to
always
stop
do.
asking me on. It makes a late night for you.
No, it's okay because people need to hear this, and it's not like you can get this. Like, speaking to somebody like you, most people, like, it's hard contacting you, Angela. It's hard to have these conversations. You know, you're super busy, right? And then not you and you actually are like not just a recruiter. You actually own a business, right? You have a life.
Mhm. I
So
don't know if I
no,
have a
I
life, but
so I don't mind because it's like, I mean, when I was trying to break into the industry, like, I was dying for stuff like this. So I don't mind.
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
mind because where else can you get it, right?
It's hard. It is, and there are only a handful of people. I mean, you're the real deal. Getting a coach is the first step. I've had coaches and mentors.
Me too.
Anyone that's successful in any type of career trajectory, you're going to do it a lot. I'm not telling you can't do it on your own, but I'm going to tell you it's a heck of a lot easier if you get a coach or a mentor.
It is. It
Mhm.
is. Even people that you think that, like, why would they have a mentor? Tony
Mhm.
Robbins has coaches. Oprah has coaches. Like,
Mhm.
you
It gives
name
you a
any
different
successful,
perspective. Yeah.
different, right? You name a successful person, they have coaches. They have mentors.
Yeah.
And that is the key to success.
Mhm. I
Um,
agree.
being able, and you can find that internally in companies too. As soon as I get into a company, I look for mentors. I look for people that,
Mhm.
support coaches. I immediately look for that. And I recommend that to you guys too.
I would agree. Absolutely. And you don't have to look even internal. I mean, when you're starting to talk about self defeating habit patterns, blockers, how to present yourself, how to overcome fear, anxiety of interviewing, all of these things, that's not specific to clinical research. I mean,
That's true.
bringing in outside coaches that can help you become superhuman, you're a
That's
better
true.
person, you know?
That's so true. And then sometimes you also might need to take it a step further, like myself, and get a licensed professional involved and get some therapy and you
Mhm.
know, um, whatever you specifically need in the therapy realm, you might need to take it there. I personally have all of it. I have therapists, I have life coach, money coaches, because I'm working on my money management, y'all. Don't judge me. Money coaches, business coaches, career coaches, like you name it. I've had
Yep.
mentors to this day, and they absolutely have all been, key components to my
I
success.
agree. I just finished a 12-week coaching session with a LinkedIn professional that helped with branding, improving our brand, my brand, our brand in the company, social media outreach, how to break into real conversations with real people every single day. And I've been sitting in this chair since 2008. It's that mediocre versus development, asking
Right,
for help, accepting the answers, looking
right,
for new answers. It's important.
right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna wait. We have one more comment. Let me see. Oh, Victoria says it's very good content. Thank you,
Thank
Victoria.
you,
All of y'all
Victoria.
have always said such nice words, but I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up for tonight because we are coming back on Wednesday, right? Same time,
Yes,
7 p.m. And we're gonna be talking about, let me see.
negotiating the job offer.
Yes, negotiating the offer. And how sometimes you don't need to be negotiating, right? Because you need to decline it.
We also need to talk about why you need to decline the eventual counter offer you're going to receive from your current company that has not given you what you've asked for to begin with.
Exactly. We're gonna talk about it all, y'all. So you don't want to miss out Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be back again. But in the meantime, the recording will become available right after this. So if you missed part of it, I know they've been running kind of long. You can watch the recording. If you missed last week, please don't, check that one out. That was another good one. But as always, we thank you so much for joining us and we appreciate each and every one of you.
Yeah, thank you, all of you guys, for your participation and your questions. And Jasmine, thank you for having me. It's been
No,
fun.
thank you, Angela, for being here. It's always fun
Yeah.
talking to you.
So awesome.
Alrighty.
All
Well,
right.
everybody, see you on
All
Wednesday.
right. Bye, guys.
Bye.